Before the fear begins, hit like and subscribe, don't miss the chills. Tell us where you're watching from, and brace yourself for stories so terrifying, they'll haunt your night. I woke up with a throbbing headache, feeling more exhausted than when I went to bed. Miles Thompson at your service, a private investigator who usually works in bustling cities. But my new assignment had brought me to Blacktail Canyon, a remote area of the US known for its dense forests and rocky peaks. It was supposed to be a simple case: find the lost hiker and restore him to his worried family. Little did I know the terrifying ordeal that awaited me. Blacktail Canyon was notorious for people disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The local authorities had chalked it up as accidents in the treacherous terrain, but something felt off. I decided to join a group of seasoned hikers who were familiar with the area. Upon meeting them, my suspicions grew as they exchanged stories about numerous unexplained occurrences. As we ventured deeper into the forest and made our way up precarious paths, we came across ever more disturbing sights. First, we encountered shredded clothing hanging from tree branches. Signs of animal attacks were typically in these parts. However, this seemed different, too calculated for any ordinary animal. Suddenly, our group stumbled upon a mutilated animal carcass that didn't resemble the usual prey of predators. The wounds seemed deliberate, caused by an almost human-like handiwork. Our shaken guide reduced the pace and spoke in hushed tones, explaining his reluctance to admit that there was something sinister lurking in these woods. The sun began to set as we approached a small clearing where the missing hiker had last been seen. The area bore evidence of struggle. Deep CLA marks dug into trees, along with traces of dried blood on nearby rocks. "What kind of creature could do this?" I whispered. While examining the bloody scene, the guide reluctantly answered me with tales about an elusive creature with razor-sharp claws who roamed these woods for generations. The locals referred to it as the silent stalker, since it eliminated its prey stealthily and without so much as a sound. The creature had a sick desire to make its victims suffer before the kill, stalking and mutilating them while evading capture. However, no one knew its true name or origin. We decided to set up camp for the night in a nearby cave, figuring it would provide some shelter and protection against the unsettling situation we found ourselves in. As we made our way toward the cave's entrance, disturbed whispers and nervous laughter echoed among my colleagues. In moments of fear, humor serves as a brief escape from reality. One of my teammates tried lightening the somber mood with a feeble joke about horror movie cliches that made us chuckle for a brief moment. That night's sleep seemed near impossible, but exhaustion won out. Eventually, a deafening screech jolted us awake early in the morning. My heart pounded wildly as adrenaline rushed through my veins. It only took seconds to grab my gun and run towards the source of the unstoppable scream. The sight that met my eyes horrified even me, a man who has seen his fair share of violence. One of our team members lay on the ground more beyond recognition. Terrified but unwilling to give up on our mission, we cautiously tread further into the undiscovered heart of Blacktail Canyon. With each passing step, the monster that staled these woods became increasingly real. Soon enough, we found ourselves surrounded by dense fog, which hung like a death shroud over a landscape littered with lifeless trees and abandoned wreckage from failed past attempts to uncover what lurked here. And it was that cursed revealing fog that I first laid eyes on the elusive creature towering at nearly 7 foot tall with wicked claws extending from its viner hands, grinning at me with a grotesque snarl revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The sensation of confronting this face-to-face nightmare flooded my body with a hollow dread. As I stared into its soulless eyes, I knew that we were in the presence of evil incarnate, an ancient predator that had haunted these lands for generations. We had exposed ourselves to the silent stalker, and now there was no turning back. The creature lunged at us, and I knew we stood little to no chance. I shouted to my team, "Run, get out of here and call for help." I could hear their footsteps retread rapidly from the dreadful beast. However, calling for help wasn't feasible for me, as my cell phone had no reception in Blacktail Canyon, a fact I found out hours before when trying to update our location to our boss. We sprinted through the foggy nightmare, hindered by the terror that locked itself around our lungs. While running, I stole a glance over my shoulder at the creature drawing ever closer. The sickly grey skin seemed almost translucent under the dim glow of the moonlight, piercing the fog and its long black hair whipping white wildly in all directions. Its spine jutted out at horrific angles. The sight fueled my adrenaline. As we rushed for safety, a nearby cabin appeared between the trees. In a moment of clarity through the fog and opportunity, we couldn't ignore breathing heavily. We scrambled inside, locking and barricading the doors as fast as we could manage. For several minutes we listened with bated breath, eyes wide-wide with fear. Finally, we heard heavy breathing and wood snapping just beyond the door, as if it was trying to dislodge our defenses. In absolute panic, one of my teammates revealed that he had heard whispers from an old man who claimed to know about this creature haunting Blacktail Canyon. He called it the Silent Stalker, an ancient monster born from evil that hunted people down through the generations. The old man had given him a small knife and mumbled something about silver being able to hurt this monster. It sounded like folklore and mythology, and until now none of us believed in those things. None of us cared enough to delve deeper into local legends, but right now fears from local stories became all too real. I rummaged through the cabin looking for a way to defend ourselves while the others reinforced our barrier. My hands fumbled onto that knife. My teammate managed to keep with him wrapped in a worn cloth. It was our only option. We armed ourselves as much as possible, hastily transforming tools and utensils into makeshift weapons. Our hearts beat in sync with the relentless pounding on the door. A guttural growl erupted outside, and then there was silence. I peeked through the cracks of our cabin barricades. The creature charged straight towards us, crashing through our defenses and roaring in fury. The room descended into chaos. Pieces of wood splintered everywhere. A teammate desperately tried to fight off the monster with a steel rod. The Silent Stalker's claws sliced to flesh. Relentlessly, blood spilled among the debris. With every movement amidst this frenzy, I lunged forward and plunged the silver knife into the creature's torso. It screeched in agony, its formerly triumphant demeanor shifting to something much darker and more desperate. Stunned by my counterattack, it stumbled backward, a thick black fluid pouring from its wound. We regrouped, clutching onto one another as we retreated from the frenzied creature that was frantic to mend itself by any means necessary. Its once sharp claw became twisted droplet of black goo as it twitched violently on the ground, decaying rapidly before us. We watched in terror, in amazement, as it finally erupted into a black mist, an entity resembling nothing of life as we knew it. Exhausted and horrified by our ordeal, we left Blacktail Canyon mourning our fallen teammate, who now lay lifeless on the floor. We vowed to never return or forget what happened within that cursed place. As we passed to its entrance, I glimpsed an engraved plaque mounted on an old tree. Here ends the Silent Stalker. Some stories might be better left untold, but Blacktail Canyon and its monster had become a gruesome and undeniable reality. A chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters of folklore come to life when you venture too close to their territory. I'm still haunted by the time I stumbled upon a remote cabin in the deep woods of Oregon. My name is Jeremiah Hawkins, and I had inherited a small patch of land from my late grandfather. The Redwoods Hills and crisp air had always brought me peace, so I figured it was the perfect place to escape city life. This was before everything changed. Having just quit my job as a tech engineer, I decided to turn off my phone and venture out into the wilderness in search of solitude. After several days of hiking along trails, I reached the outskirts of my newly acquired property. There I met an elderly couple who advised caution, warning me about strange happenings. They never elaborated on exactly what these senses were, but insisted that I be alert. As I continued into the dense forest, I encountered another traveler named Brooklyn Stover. Brooklyn had been backpacking through the region for weeks and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of its flora and fauna. We decided to venture together deeper into the shadows of the Great Pines. Days passed as we treed through thickets and over rocky terrain until we stumbled upon an eerie sight, a dilapidated wooden cabin covered in moss and ivy. Intrigued by its decrepit exterior, we cautiously approached and pushed open its creaking door. Inside, a thick layer of dust blanketed the floor and furniture. The place had clearly been abandoned for years. Brooklyn's instincts told us to leave immediately, but my curiosity got the better of me as I discovered a hidden basement door beneath a rotting rug. Ignoring Brooklyn's advice, we descended into darkness. The walls felt strangely damp, while spattering noises echoed deeper down. Suddenly startled by an intense screeching sound, we rushed back up to find dozens of birds lying motionless near the entrance. Feeling increasingly uneasy, we decided to abandon our exploration for now and set up camp far away from the cabin. As we cooked dinner by the fire, we heard shuffling and howling. In the distance, an eerie fog began to roll in. Maybe it's just a pack of wolves moving through? Brookland suggested, her voice. Trembling later, as I lay in my sleeping bag, unable to sleep, I caught a faint glimpse of what appeared to be a beast lurking near our campsite. Before I could react or provoke it, the creature ran off into the darkness with an unnerving agility. The next morning, we quickly packed our gear and nervously made our way deeper into the woods, hoping to escape whatever had been stalking us along the way. We encountered more dead animals, foxes, raccoons, even deer, all lying motionless with wounds resembling deep cuts. At one point during our journey, we overhear two fellow hikers discussing a similar encounter. We found these claw marks on a few of these trees. One hiker named Isaiah Caldwell said, "Deeper than any bear or wolf could make. You think it's something else." That evening, as we sat around the dwindling campfire and contemplated our situation, Brooklyn suddenly announced that she was going back to seek help from that elderly couple we had met weeks ago. She couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something. Reluctantly, agreeing with her plan, we decided to set off first thing in the morning. No sooner had dawn broken when an inhuman hell pierced through the still air. Shaken but determined to push forward, we tracked hastily towards where we believed our starting point might be located. As we proceeded deeper into the forest, a large shape loomed before us through the trees. A sense of dread washed over me as I caught sight of the creature responsible for all the terror, an enormous beast covered in thick matted fur, with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could likely shred through flesh with ease. Its eyes glinted with a malevolent intelligence, and it moved far more swiftly than its size should allow. In that brief moment of eye contact, I felt an overwhelming terror that words cannot do justice. We knew we had to make our escape immediately, regardless of the risk. Summoning our courage and adrenaline, Brooklyn and I bolted towards the nearest possible exit from this nightmare, a rocky outcrop. In the distance, we clambered up the rocks, our breaths ragged from fear and exhaustion. The creature pursued us with relentless fury, its claws tearing through the forest floor. As it gained on us, panic surged within us, pushing us to move quickly without a moment to think about our escape route. Approaching a ravine, Brooklyn shouted to avoid crossing the narrow ledge, reasoning that the creature's size would put it at a disadvantage. We edged along the cliff side, holding on tightly to whatever handholds we could find. Suddenly Isaiah, who had been lagging behind due to his fear of heights, lost his grip and plummeted into the ravine with a shrill scream. Grieving for his loss, but unable to stop our desperate escape bid, Brooklyn and I continued ascending through the trees. The creature's enraged roars echoed behind us as it tried to find a way around the steep ravine. As we reached higher ground, our progress slowed by fatigue and distress over losing Isaiah. We finally found ourselves in an unfamiliar valley littered with abandoned hunting cabins. Attempting to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and the beast, we surveyed our surroundings for something that could help us understand what we were facing and how we might escape its clutches. One cabin contained old maps and journals left behind by hunters who had once frequented these woods. As we pored over these texts by candlelight, while keeping watch for any signs of the creature's pursuit, I suddenly stumbled upon a detailed account of a similar beast that had terrorized this area decades ago. The journal detailed how hunters believed they had vanquished this monstrous being long ago, only for it to return to haunt them. Since we dared not call for help from our remote location, given the creature's speed and ferocity, Brooklyn scoured through these journals in hopes of finding a clue as to how they had driven off the monster in the past. One passage caught our attention. Only when we learned the creature's real name and name whispered softly among the forest's oldest trees could we expose its weakness and drive it away. Brooklyn and I racked our brains as to what this name could be. Was it an ancient, forgotten legend native to these woods? We spent hours parsing through the journals, piecing together fragments of tales, until we found it Rugulo. We exchanged a glance, knowing that this name could be the key to not only understanding the creature but also somehow escaping its terror. But having merely found its name was not enough. What were we supposed to do with this knowledge? As we studied the text further, we discovered that speaking Rug's name aloud within its earshot would render it weak and vulnerable. But how could we bring ourselves close enough to the beasts that wanted to tear us apart? And even if we managed it, would it work? There were no guarantees, yet it seemed like our only hope. Armed with this newfound information and our backs against the wall, Brooklyn and I made a desperate plan. Should the creature find us, one of us would shout its name, while the other would lay bait in a makeshift trap. Sure enough, as dawn broke, less growls echoed through the trees. It had found us. Once again, my heart pounded in my chest as I prepared to carry out our plan. The beast burst into the cabin, its muscular form forcing itself through the door. As Brooklyn prepared to trigger our simple snare, I shouted Rugulo with every ounce of courage I possessed. To our surprise, the creature stopped in its tracks and let out a pained roar, seeing Rugala weakened. Brooklyn sprang into action and activated our makeshift trap, causing logs to topple onto it from above. What with a final anguish scream from Rugulo, the creature retreated into the woods, leaving us injured but alive. As we limped out of the now ruined cabin and began our long journey back to civilization, we took a moment to remember Isaiah and the bravery he displayed in his final moments. We knew that his sacrifice had given us the chance to survive and unearth the secret to driving Rugulo away. Although we were unsure if Rugulo would never return to haunt these woods again, we hoped that by sharing our story with others, they too could be armed with the knowledge of how to confront and weaken this terrible creature. The sun was about to set and the crisp air was a constant reminder that I should head back home as soon as possible. All I needed was a few shots of this breathtaking scenery to show my friends back home in Boston when they asked what drove me to take a solo trip deep into the Appalachian. My name is Harrison Dawkins, and suffice to say photography is my obsession. I started walking back to my rented cabin, feeling proud of my find, a beautifully isolated spot, far away from the hustle and bustle that constantly nagged at me in my otherwise ordinary life. As I descended downward toward the cabin, nestled between thick green foliage, I noticed another hiker staring intently at something in the distance. Their dog, Nova, barked again, continuing to hold its position and growl, "Hey there, beautiful day, isn't it?" I said cautiously, attempting to ease the awkward atmosphere. "Yeah," replied the stranger, looking back at me with an unsettling glint in his eyes. "Name's Clyde Browen, just trying to figure out why my dog won't move." Nova's growling intensified as we heard rustling coming from behind some nearby bushes before either of us could catch a proper glimpse of what it was. A thundering sound echoed through the trees, forcing me to dismiss it as distant wildlife. Or perhaps an abrupt collapse of deadwood, or attempting to distract from Nova's distaste for our surroundings. I shared a bit about myself with Clyde. Left my job at an insurance firm to pursue a passion for photography. Tired of sitting in an office all day, I chuckled while trying to sound relatable. Clyde brushed off any humor but did share that he owned a small mechanic shop not too far away from here and often hiked this area for leisure. Our shared appreciation for the remoteness provided common ground. As we walked together toward the cabin, the sky continued to darken. Yet something outside my cabin didn't feel right. I considered calling for help, but found myself unsure if there was even a problem, and my deep loathing of shame caressed my instincts into hesitancy. As we approached the cabin, the rustling I heard from before grew agitated, hairs up on both our necks. Clyde and I shifted our glance toward the source of the disturbance. A chilling figure with mangled fur tattered unnervingly around its bony limbs emerged from the shadows. The creature stumbled about awkwardly as if it were lost or had been injured in some recent struggle. Its teeth glistened in the faint last light of day, protruding from its elongated and contorted skull. The grotesque grind of bone against bone barely mass. A disturbing sense of hunger emanating from its milky eyes. "By God," gasped Clyde. Watching as this hideous beast sluggishly stalked closer to us, I wanted to call for help, but realized our seclusion meant we were on our own. No one would hear us scream out here. For days. All I craved was isolation, and now I couldn't feel more trapped by my own reckless desires. "Stay calm," Clyde hissed through gritted teeth. "Think about something light-hearted." He cracked an awkward joke. As we weighed our options under immense pressure, We decided that quickly heading back to his mechanic shop to devise a better defense plan was our best possible chance at survival. Clyde and I moved cautiously, making our way back to his mechanic shop. With each step, the sense of dread grew to calm our narrow. As we moved through the woods, we occasionally whispered hopeful words through clenched jaws. The screech of rustling leaves continued to echo around us, creating a terrifying symphony alongside the creature's sighing snarls without a second to spare. Clyde and I finally reached his mechanic shop. Once inside, we locked the door and he scrambled around for anything we could use as a makeshift weapon or defense. "It's not going to hold for long," I thought as I stared at the flimsy door. No sooner had that thought crossed my mind than the creature violently slammed against the door. Clyde and I held our breaths as it scratched and battered its way through. "We need help," I whispered urgently. In response, Clyde grabbed a flare gun from one corner of his cramped shop and rushed outside to fire it into the sky. The bright light illuminated the whole area like a crimson torch. As if in response to that flare, the creature shrieked in pain before retreating. We could hear its bones crunching with every movement it made. While stumbling away from our sanctuary, believing that we should take advantage of this temporary reprieve from danger, Clyde phoned for assistance using a satellite phone in his shop, while I remained vigilant near the entrance. "Help is on its way," said Clyde, when he finished explaining our ordeal to whomever was on the other end of that phone. "There's sending someone who knows what we're dealing with." Feeling equal parts relieved and terrified at this news, Clyde and I tensed upon hearing heavy footsteps approaching outside. A dark silhouette came into view just beyond the doorway, being instantly recognizable as another human figure, and Clyde unlocked and opened the door. The figure introduced himself. "I'm Dr. Andrew Harris. I'm an expert on creatures of folklore and I've been studying them for years." He looked around nervously, clearly scanning the nearby area for any sign of the creature we had encountered. "But how can you help?" I asked, still in shock that assistance had actually arrived. "I recognized your description of the creature when Clyde mentioned it over the satellite phone," explained Dr. Harris. "It appears to be a wendigo, an ancient creature from Native American mythology. They are said to be created when a human consumes the flesh of another." Upon hearing these unsettling details, Clyde and I suddenly felt even more vulnerable and terrified than before. Regardless, Dr. Harris offered us some protection by providing us with what he called Wendigo, repelling amulets, ancient symbols from the indigenous people believed to ward off Wendigos. Dr. Harris theorized that this creature might have found its way down from some northern wilderness area due to being driven by hunger or altered migration patterns caused by human interference. With his guidance and protection in hand, the three of us cautiously headed outside, determined to evade further encounters with the Wendigo until we could make our way to safety. As we moved through the woods under Dr. Harris's direction, he recounted stories of other encounters with creatures of lore and shared his knowledge on how to defend oneself from them. Finally, after what felt like hours of tense suspense, we reached a small outpost where other members of Dr. Harris's research team awaited us. Among them was a native healer who performed rituals to ward off the Wendigo and protect us during our journey back to civilization. With sweat on our brows and fear still hanging over us like a dark cloud, we trudged towards our new destination. Grateful for both Dr. Harris's wisdom and the aid his team provided in time, we managed to distance ourselves from the creature's territory without further incidents. The Wendigo did not pursue us any longer. While we thank Dr. Harris for his unwavering assistance in combating the Wendigo, we knew it would always lurk in the recesses of our memories, though we had survived our encounter with death. The lasting impression left upon our psyches would forever remind us of the blood-curdling violence humans are capable of inspiring, brought forth by a fear-filled mythos that thrives with each retelling. It all started after work one evening. My name is Laro Basom and I'm a park ranger station near the small town of Marlin, Washington. I had just finished the graveyard shift, keeping an eye on the park and its surroundings during the nighttime activities of nocturnal creatures. As I was heading back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Walking through the vast, dense forests that surrounded my cabin, I continued to feel uneasy. The wild flora, consisting of beautiful yet intimidating trees such as angelman, spruce, and subalpine fir, created a towering fortress obstructing any access to daylight. Normally nature appeals to me, but today it incited a sense of dread. As an avid hiker born in Kansas who moved to Washington specifically for its picturesque landscapes, it was unusual for me to feel so unnerved by my environment. That's when I stumbled upon some peculiar markings near the base of a tree, deep scratches inflicted by some sort of predator. They appeared fresh too. I found it unnerving that such an act could occur close to my cabin without me noticing. Later that night, as I sat by the crackling fire in my living room with a hot cup of coffee clutched firmly between my hands, I pondered over what could have caused those markings. Deep down, my gut churned like there was danger lurking nearby. And if there's one thing I've learned from your spent in remote areas, trust your instincts. Suddenly pounding on my front door jolted me from my thoughts. Cautiously, I got up and peered through the window to see a man standing outside, disheveled and frantic, like he'd seen hell itself. This was Ellery Ransom, an experienced outdoorsman and fellow park ranger, known for his calm demeanor and bushy mustache. "Ellery, what's wrong?" I asked, opening the door. "Lie," he gasped, trembling. "You won't believe what I saw out there. We've got to leave now." "What's going on? What did you see?" "A creature, Lyle, a monstrous creature I've never seen before. It was tearing through the forest like it was nothing." Ellery stammered. My mind raced, as I remembered the odd markings near my cabin. Could this creature have made them? The situation felt dire, but as park rangers, we have a duty to remain in charge of these remote regions, no matter how dangerous it got. "Show me," I demanded. Ellery hesitated but finally agreed to take me back to where he encountered the beast. As we ventured deeper into the dense foliage, my unease grew. With each step, the forest seemed to come alive around us, with unsettling sounds and movements hidden within its shadows. Determined to remain rational, despite my growing fear, I tried cracking a joke. "Maybe Bigfoot's on vacation from the Pacific Northwest." "We're not dealing with Bigfoot here," Ellery responded gravely. We reached a small clearing where an enormous deer lay lifeless, its ribcage torn open and limbs severed from its body. This sheer violence of the scene shocked me. Not even wolves or bears could inflict such gruesome damage so quickly. I kept recalling those scratches etched into the tree trunk, wondering if this was the work of the same unseen terror now stalking us in these woods. Tension clenched in my chest as we prepared to press on searching for any clues that might reveal what exactly we were dealing with. That's when we heard it, low growls echoing in our ears, reverberating through the trees. Turning slowly with dread, we caught a glimpse of something altogether unnatural lurking behind us, the beast that had been stalking its prey in silence all this time. With a flash, it lunged towards Ellery, but barely missing him as he jumped out of the way at 8 foot tall, covered in coarse black fur and an elongated snout filled with sharp teeth dripping with blood. This creature was like nothing either of us had ever seen before or ever imagined could exist. It snarled, raising its massive claws as it prepared for another attack. Ella and I exchanged a glance, knowing we had to act quickly if we were to survive this encounter. We knew calling for help was futile, even if the signal was strong enough to use our phones. In these remote woods, it would take too long for anyone to find us. Instead of fighting back, we did the only thing that made sense. We ran. The creature pursued us relentlessly, killing every creature it encountered: birds, squirrels, anything that crossed its path. We moved as fast as humanly possible, knowing that fighting this beast was not an option. After a few minutes of heart-pounding sprinting, we stumbled upon a cabin tucked away in the woods. We dashed inside and locked the door behind us. The cabin looked like it hadn't been occupied in years, smelling of mold and decay. We searched the cabin for any information about this creature, any sort of clue that could arm us with knowledge of what we were up against. There had to be something here that would give us insight into this monstrous being. As the minutes ticked by, panic set in. Elle spotted a collection of old books on folklore and cryptids on a shelf covered in cobwebs. Knowing little about such creatures ourselves, we flipped through the dusty pages hoping to find any hints or advice on how to escape this horror. Then Ellery found something truly odd, an old photo depicting the very beast hunting us in shaky handwriting. Under the picture were Latin words vexil lupus, which translates to tormenting wolf. It became apparent that this was no ordinary wolf, but rather an abhorrent specimen of ancient myth and violence. Standing tall on its hind legs, With dark fur covering its massive frame and with teeth longer than a grown man's hand, this tormenting wolf seemed more like a nightmarish chimera than anything occurring naturally in these woods. Armed with this newfound knowledge, we stood our ground as the creature violently slammed its powerful body against the door. We knew that we had to weather the beast's onslaught if we were going to stand any chance of survival. We couldn't dare search for weapons or even try to come up with a plan to face off against it. The only viable option was to run when the opportunity arose. The tormenting wolf seemed like an unstoppable force of nature, but with a surprising stroke of luck, it overlooked an important detail. It missed that the door had begun to crack and splinter, but so too had a portion of the wall beside the door frame on which rested a heavy bookshelf. As if hearing our UN-spoken prayers, that shelf fell with a resounding crash, blocking the creator's assault and trapping it in place. Ellery and I seized our chance and bolted through the cabin's back door, never looking back or stopping until we were far away from that forsaken place. Finally, safe in a town miles away from the cabin, we found some locals who recognize our description of the tormenting wolf. They agreed to send a team of hunters into the woods to confront and destroy the beast that had attacked us. In our desperate fight from danger, we never learned who owned that old cabin or how they were connected to this elusive creature. Perhaps that best remains unknown. As days turned into weeks and weeks, into months, life slowly returned to normal for Ellery and me. Yet there would always be one part of those dreadful events that haunts our every step, the knowledge of what lay deep within these woods, waiting and watching. I remember that evening like it was yesterday. I had just finished a long day of work at the local lumber mill and my friend Donny Hardwick had invited me to his remote cabin for a relaxing getaway. Donny was that rare and peculiar type of person who could always land on his feet, no matter how difficult life got. We were driving down a winding forest road in upstate New York. The tall trees cast eerie shadows on the ground while the sun retreated below the horizon. Donny's cabin was situated in a quiet clearing surrounded by dense woods. We took pleasure in sharing stories and laughing about our work days. As the night pressed on, the fire crackled in its pit, providing warmth and inviting us to unwind with another beer. As we talked into the night, we gradually became aware of an unsettling noise coming from the woods. It sounded like two rocks were grinding against each other. Donny and I exchanged nervous glances, but we didn't say anything at first. We wanted to believe it was just our imagination. The sound intensified closer this time and my nerves began to shout as panic bubbled up within me. I attempted to make light of the situation with a joke, anything to mask our growing apprehension, but it fell flat in the face of our unease. Maybe we should call for help, I suggested, hesitantly reaching for my cell phone. However, Donny reminded me that self-service here was practically non-existent due to the cabin's secluded nature. As the grinding noise approached even closer, we realized that our best chance at survival would be to rely on our instincts and reaction speeds, qualities born out of numerous years working with machinery and cutting timber in the mill. The creature emerged from the darkened woods on all fours, a hulking beast, unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its skin glistened like raw meat under the moonlight, with patches of decomposing fur decorating the rest of its body. Its teeth were jagged, broken and lined up improperly, yet still promising a painful end to anyone who got too close. Donny scrambled for a hunting rifle. He kept hidden in the cabin and I retrieved a rusted knife from my utility belt. We faced the mangled creature head-on but remained unable to move, our eyes locked onto its grotesque form. In horror, our minds raced. The practical knowledge we had accumulated over the years now failed us in the face of the abominable beast. Why hadn't we packed more effective weapons? Was there any way to signal for help beyond the forest's murmurs? The creature let out a guttural roar and charged straight at us with adrenaline pumping through my veins. I swung the knife wildly while Donny leveled his rifle. We were ready to confront this nightmare. As bullets ripped through air and rusty blade met rotting flesh, it was impossible to ignore the overwhelming terror lurking beneath every desperate strike. The sudden onslaught had made us realize that our lives were on the line, that there was so much more to fear than just an unsettling noise in the woods. We continued battling this horrifying creature while struggling to preserve the bonds that tied us together, our love for our families, our shared experiences at work and our drive to survive against all odds, Through every gunshot slash and gut-wrenching scream that echoed in those dark woods, one thing resonated loudly. We fought not just for ourselves, but for a safer world than what awaited us. Should we perish though? Our foes seemed undying and relentless in its pursuit of chaos, and Carnage Donnie and I held firm in our conviction that we could persevere the hope that courses through every human heart that drive for life. We shared with those who would never know about our harrowing encounter with terror, personified between bursts of gunfire. I thought back to how I faced life's struggles as a lumber mill worker, with perpetual strife and laughter all merging into a single moment that forced me to confront my fears. The creature roared once more, its decayed body covered in bullet holes and slashed with makeshift weaponry. This abomination of reality was tireless and relentless in its pursuit of destruction. It had taken many lives. Its gruesome appetite never seemed to be shardaed, and it was clear that it would take as many as it could before leaving behind a murderous path. In the midst of the terrifying battle, I felt despair slowly seeping in. There were too many times. We were close to being caught by the monstrous creature. The close encounters were too many to count, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was merely a matter of time before one of us was the next victim. As we battled further into the night, the creature's rage only seemed to grow stronger as our strength waned. Finally, sensing an opportunity to escape, I shouted at Donnie with urgency. "We need to split up and distract it. It's our best chance." Donnie hesitated but ultimately agreed with my plan. We devised a quick strategy. He would continue shooting at the creature while I ran in the opposite direction. This way, one of us could call for help while the other tried to lure the monster away from both of us, and so we separated. I sprinted through the woods, listening for any sounds behind me. I could hear gunshots in the distance and hoped that Downey was keeping the creature at bay. My legs grew weary and my lungs burned as I pushed through my exhaustion. Suddenly, a rustling in nearby bushes alerted me to a figure appearing from behind them, an elderly man dressed in tattered clothing, who studied me cautiously. Yet curiously, he spoke urgently. "You need help." I nodded anxiously, knowing that time was running out. Without hesitating or explaining further, he guided me through obscured paths in direction opposing Donnie and away from this terrible creature's range. We arrived at a house and the man motioned for me to keep quiet as he opened the door. Inside was an elderly woman sitting in a wooden chair, her grey hair framing her weathered face. She seemed to have been expecting us. "What you're facing is called the Wendigo," she whispered, her voice urgent. "It's a creature of legend. At least I thought it was just a story." She continued explaining that the Wendigo was a spirit, once human, who had consumed flesh and transformed into an insatiable monster. According to local folklore, it would kill, indiscriminately, its hunger never ending. "We have to save my friend," I exclaimed, suddenly reminded that Donnie was still out there with the Wendigo. Together we hatched a plan to rescue Donnie from the Wendigo's deadly grasp. The elderly woman provided us with rudimentary weapons and sound devices which could help, distracted enough, to retrieve Donnie and Scath. With extreme caution and determination, we reached an area echoing with gunshots. There Donnie had stood resolutely against a monstrous beast while trying his best to avoid its increasingly furious onslaught. The creature seemed exhausted, its movements sluggish. With heart pounding in my chest, I activated the noise-making devices and instantly drew its attention away from Donnie. Once distracted, we hurriedly led him back to safety. The Wendigo distracted only momentarily by the unfamiliar sounds attacking its sensitive ears. We made it back to house successfully, with the knowledge provided by our newfound allies on how to repel the creature temporarily from habited areas by using specialized talismans. We decided we needed to warn people about this deadly legend. Come true. The events of our terrible encounter etched deeply into our memories, will always evoke terror when silenced by dark nights and unfamiliar forests. A stark reminder that some legends should not be forgotten or dismissed as myth. But with vigilance, unity, and the power of newfound knowledge, we won't let our lives succumb to the horrors of the Wendigo. And so the battle continued, a timeless struggle to protect what is most important to all of us: our loved ones, our lives, and our hopes for a brighter future, free from eternal fear and suffering. In those darkest hours, when faced with an unstoppable enemy, we found strength in ourselves and each other. We fought not just for our own survival but for generations to come, refusing to let the Wendo gruesome nightmares become the reality that consumes us all. I was heading to a remote cabin in the woods, miles away from the nearest town, to get some much-needed solitude. My name is Wyan Branson and I'm a touring musician, so it's rare for me to have any time away from the bustling city life. This cabin had been in my family for generations, so I thought it would be the perfect escape from my hectic life. Upon arriving at the cabin, I met my neighbors, Chesney Thompson and Odd ROAs. They were also staying in a nearby cabin. We exchanged pleasantries and talked about our reasons for being here. As we chatted, I made a humorous remark about how none of us really fit into city life either. The days passed by with peace and tranquility. As we explored the area around our cabins, we discovered an old hiking trail leading up to an overlook that provided a breathtaking view of the densely wooded area stretching out beneath us. One day, while hiking the same trail with CHZN and Erd, we came across something unusual. A large carcass of a deer on the ground, with its innards exposed. A strange odor permeated the air. As we inspected it closer, the sight left us feeling uneasy, as we'd expected our temporary homes to be quiet sanctuaries, away from horrors like this. Returning to our respective cabins, uneasiness lingered among the three of us, but we agreed not to dwell on it too much. It was merely nature taking its course. That's what living out in nature does. A couple of nights later, while sitting at my window enjoying a cup of tea and finishing up some writing work, I heard a rustling noise outside in the darkness. Trusting my instincts that it wasn't an ordinary forest creature sneaking around, I peered through my window into the pitch-black night, but saw nothing telling myself to relax. I sat back down and continued with my work. It wasn't long before the distant muffled sound of an animal in pain pierced the otherwise silent night. It sounded like a gut-towel howl, and I knew that something wasn't right. Erd and CHZN must have heard it too, because their cabin door creaked open and their flashlights clicked on. As they headed toward my cabin, they were just as unnerved as I was. We agreed to investigate, together with the hope that it was merely a wounded animal needing help. Armed with our flashlights, we entered the dark forest in search of the source of the cries. After walking for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we stumbled upon another grisly scene, another deer carcass with massive claw marks on its body and its enamels scattered around. The carcass appeared fresher than what we had seen before, and we couldn't shake off the feeling that, whatever did this was possibly watching us. Our heart rates increased and urgency grew as we tried to find a logical explanation for this unsettling sight. We couldn't help ourselves from thinking of a possible villain or evil entity at play, something fierce enough to rip apart these large animals with such ease. We decided to head back quickly, but couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being followed. Our conversation turned serious as we discussed whether or not to ask for outside help regarding this situation. Perhaps there was a large predator stalking these woods that needed to be dealt with. Just as Erd stopped in his tracks and pointed at something large lurking in the trees up ahead, my flashlight flickered off, followed closely by CHZN, and Everett's plunged into darkness. Our hearts raced while heavy breathing echoed through the trees around us. This menacing, unknown creature silhouette emerged from obscurity, its muscular frame resembling that of a bear, but more terrifying in manner. The extent of its colossal size and the fury it seemed to exude left us with no doubt that we were in serious danger. In a state of terror, I struggled to reset my flashlight as CHZN and Erd tried to do the same, frantically pleading for one another's assistance. Finally, one of our flashlights sprung back to life, shining directly upon the monstrous creature that appeared even more menacing up close. We stared in horror as the creature let out a gutto roar, saliva dripping from its massive, razor-sharp teeth. Instinctively, we turned and began to run, desperate to escape this nightmare that had come to life. "Call for help!" I shouted, realizing that we stood no chance against this beast alone. Eberhard grabbed his phone and frantically dialed the number for the ranger station, but there was no response. The creature's presence seemed to somehow interfere with our electronics. As we continued our frantic dash through the forest, the creature stalked us relentlessly, drawing closer with every step. Despite tried our best attempts to evade it, the beast was gaining on us. We could hear its heavy breaths growing louder and its massive paws pounding against the ground. Zn and Odd began panicking as we encountered a steep ravine blocking our escape with nowhere else to go. I suggested that we climb down, hoping that the creature wouldn't attempt such a descent. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had left. With limited time and dwindling choices, we began our perilous descent down the ravine. Just as we reached about halfway down, we heard a thunderous crash from above. The creature was determined not to let us go without a fight. Large boulders tumbled down toward us, narrowly missing our makeshift footholds. As we neared the bottom of the ravine, I spotted what looked like an entrance to a small cave. Without hesitating, I yelled to my friends to head for it. We quickly darted inside and huddled together in darkness, our breaths ragged from fear and exhaustion. The sound of the creature's angry roars echoed throughout the cave. While waiting in abject terror, not knowing what awaited us outside or just how long we could remain hidden within this tiny refuge, Zn suddenly recalled his grandfather, an old man who frequently shared stories of lore. While the protagonist knows nothing about folklore, his friend Zn begins to share details of the beast. From the stories. The creature, Zn whispered, his voice wavering. It resembles something my grandfather used to tell me about the Yeren, an enormous beast said to dwell deep within forests capable of tearing humans apart with ease. I never believed it was true. Until now, for hours, we hid in silence, adrenaline pumping through our veins as we listened for any sign that the creature had given up its pursuit. To our relief, the roars gradually grew fainter and further away. Despite our exhaustion, relief washed over us and we decided to carefully make our way out of the cave as if granted a miracle. We stumbled upon a park ranger who had been alerted by our earlier call for help and had tracked our location using GPS coordinates from Ord's phone. He led us back to safety and, as we recounted our terrifying encounter with this monstrous creature from folklore, now knowing it was called the Yeren, the ranger's face grew pale. As a child, the elders in my town spoke of the Yeren too. He remarked somberly. I truly never thought I'd meet someone who survived an encounter with one of those beasts. With heavy hearts, we left the forest behind us, vowing never to return to those haunted woods where we found ourselves face to face with a legendary monster. The memories of that night would remain eternally etched on our minds, a chilling reminder that some creatures from ancient folklore still walk this earth, lying in wait for their next unsuspecting prey. We made sure to share our story with those willing to listen, as a warning of what could be lurking out there, deep within the shadows of nature's embrace. And while they may seem like tales told to scare children, sometimes those stories are built on a foundation of terrifying truth. I was driving home after visiting my cousin, Sally Mae Thompson, in a small rural town located in the Appalachian Mountains. The sun had long set and the moon now hugged tightly to the horizon. My car's headlights shone through a thick mist that refused to dissipate. As the winding road cut through the silent forest, I felt my grip on the steering wheel tighten. The deafening silence was interrupted by something crashing against the tree nearby on edge. I immediately pulled over and cautiously exited my car. I squinted into the darkness, tracing the source of the noise to an injured deer riding on the ground. My curiosity got the better of me as I drew closer to examine it. To my horror, its hind legs had been savagely torn off. At that moment I heard a guttural growl behind me. I turned around and, trembling with fear, saw a horrific creature standing there. It stood more than 7 foot tall on muscular legs built for chasing prey. Its matted F dripped with blood and pus from deep oozing wounds covering its entire body. From beneath heavy brows glared 2 hateful eyes that sparkled like embers in hellfire. Its mouth hung agape, showcasing an arsenal of razor sharp teeth accented by viciously dripping drool. Somehow mustering my courage, I slowly backed away, but the creature matched each pace with its own forward movement. I realized I could not outrun this hulking beast. My fingers clutched my keys so tightly they began to dig into my palm. Just then a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me as another car pulled up next to mine. A man stepped out and introduced himself as Ben Foster. Seeing the panic in my eyes, he asked what was wrong. I pointed at the gruesome scene of the deer and described what I had just seen. After hearing the account, Ben offered his assistance. We decided against summoning help, as my cell phone showed no connectivity and this area was miles away from the nearest village. The communication tower had been out of service for weeks. Armed with only a flashlight and a hunting knife, Ben accompanied me back to the mangled deer. As we approached, we noticed that the carcass was missing. Our eyes darted around the surrounding brush in the hope of finding any clue. Tensely, we continued along the road, when suddenly there was a rustling in the bushes directly ahead. The creature sprang out, landing mere feet away from us. Our flashlights catching its demonic features, we attempted to back away without smoking it further. Each step covered in beads of sweat that poured down our faces. At an alarming pace, we exchanged glances that echoed resignation. I knew deep down things would never be the same. Suddenly reaching into my pants pocket, I wrapped my fingers around the small pocket knife, knowing this would offer little solace or defense against this monstrosity. Through sharp teeth, stained with bloodlust, stripped a wretched grin that demonstrated an understanding of what lay hidden in my palm, the creature lunged forward with unearthly speed and fury, unparalleled by any animal either of us had encountered. We sprinted in opposite directions trying to evade its wrath, but now hopelessly divided. Frantic breaths escaping my throat were soon met by horrified screams belonging to Ben, each cry growing quieter as seconds ticked past until they ceased altogether, consumed by silence or something even more nefarious perhaps, this beast's insatiable appetite. With tears blurring my vision as terrible thoughts filled my mind, I stumbled upon an abandoned shack nestled within the foliage. Inside laid plans etched into parchment paper, evidence of locals' failed attempts to hunt down and overpower this predatory beast, terrorizing their once peaceful town. Quickly I closed the door behind me, making sure to not let it creak. The shack looked untouched by time. As I scanned the room, my eye caught a dusty book lying open on a table. I approached it hesitantly, carefully dusting off its cover. Upon skimming its contents, I gasped. It was information on local folklore and legends. Among these pages lurked mention of a malicious creature, the Cordon beast. It was said to be a ruthless hunter with unmatched speed and agility, sporting serrated teeth and dark fur that blended seamlessly with the night. The detailed sketches in the book horrifyingly resembled the creature we had just encountered. I took a deep breath and rummaged through an old chest in the corner of the shack, my hand grasped around something metallic, an old walkie-talkie. Its battery life appeared low, but sufficient enough for an emergency call. "Hello," I whispered into it apprehensively. "Is anyone there? Ben and I need help." Near the shack in the woods, silence met my ears at first. Eventually, though, a male voice responded. "This is Sam from the local patrol. We'll reach your location as soon as we can, just stay hidden." I knew calling for help put others at risk. However, Ben's potential fate paralyzed me with fear. We didn't stand a chance alone against this beast. Time crawled by his eye, huddled in that precarious haven, waiting for the patrol's arrival. Guttural noises echoed from the outside, a cruel reminder of the danger lurking just beyond those wooden walls. Finally, after what felt like hours, flashlights flickered through cracks in the shack's exterior. Release leaf washed over me as Sam burst through that door, flanked by two of his patrol officers, Jenna and Tom. As they surveyed their surroundings, as well as me, infused with terror, they began to piece together the events that had transpired. They asked me about Ben, and I hesitantly admitted that I had last heard him scream. It wasn't long before we found Ben's body, his wound, evidence of the Cordon beast's attack. Grief threatened to consume me, but every ounce of energy had to be focused on the mission at hand. We decided to stick together as Sam led us through the treacherous undergrowth in search of the beast. Each step weighed heavily with dread, but none dared break formation around us. Darkness wrapped its cold embrace. Heartbeats hastened with each rustle in the trees. Suddenly, a monstrous howl interrupted the quiet and sent shivers down our spines. The Cordon beast appeared mere yards away from our terror-stricken group. We froze and shared fear, our flashlights illuminating its powerful form and hateful eyes. Sam screamed. Run as the creature charged towards us, instinctively scattering into different directions, proved futile. It was as if it had eyes on every one of us. Tom let out a gut-wrenching cry as the Cordon beast's jaws clamped around his arm, tearing it from his body like a ragged doll. It then pounced on Jenna, ruthlessly mauling her until she ceased to struggle. Moments after her last scream left the night, Air silence filled our world once more. A violent reminder that anguish and death were not far from each. Sam and I barely made it back to town. Our hearts raced, but PED in comparison to the horror that ensued behind us. Blood-stained streets testified to other victims who had encountered their cruel fate at the claws of a once unknown monster. It wasn't until much later that I gathered the courage to visit where it all began, that forsaken shack. In the woods it stood as an eerie monument to innocent lost and terror, a lifeline severed by horror. The Cordon Beast's reign of terror had drawn to a close, but the town would forever be scarred by the knowledge that such monstrous evil had once roamed its shadowed embrace. Our memories, burned with images of those we lost to its hunger, would become our heavy burden to bear, a constant reminder of what once was the legend itself. The Cordon Beast nestled deep within Fola pages that day. No longer confined to the walls of a dusty book, it became an all-too-real nightmare, now eternally seared into our hearts and minds. I remember taking a break from college, driving down to my uncle's cabin in the woods of Appalachia. My name's Anthony Stonewall. Friends call me Tony. Life in this city was getting to me, and I needed some fresh air for a change. It was just me, my camera, and a backpack full of supplies. 20 minutes from my destination, the road became bumpy and treacherous. I parked my car and began to hike. As I navigated through the lush greenery, the trees stretched taller with each passing step. At last, that long-awaited cabin replaced the endless expanse of forest, unlocking the door. An eerie, stale smell greeted me. It had been a while since this place had seen life, but that didn't matter. I instantly felt at peace. After unpacking, I decided to explore the forest. A few hours into my track, I stumbled upon a small clearing with a sign, Endeavor Falls. 1 mile. Curiosity got the better of me. I made up my mind to check out the waterfall. The journey to Endeavor Falls was beautiful. The air was crisp, birds singing in harmony as sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. A sudden muffled thud interrupted nature's symphony. A little alarmed, I told myself I was only hearing some wildly in the distance. Minutes later I arrived at Endeavor Falls. The water cascaded over slick rocks with pristine clarity. A shudderbug's dream. My trusty camera came out and soon began snapping away. Absorbed by nature's spectacle, I barely noticed a figure looming nearby, tall and bipedal like a human, yet covered in dark fur. An unsettling sight. My heart leaped into my throat when its snarl sliced through the peaceful silence, realizing what stared at me, a hulking beast that seemed more animal than human. I knew help was out of reach and my phone had no signal. Unarmed and afraid, I slowly began to step back, praying the creature hadn't noticed too late. It lunged at me with a blood-curdling growl. Panicked, I sprang into action, swiftly scaling a tree nearby. The creature followed in hot pursuit, snapping branches as it clawed its way up. I tried to distract the monster by hurling a rock from above. I missed the animalistic himself up the tree. No time to react. Not quite considering myself an athlete, I was confident that my experience running track in high school had saved my life up until this point. Keeping my distance, I managed to find a path back to the cabin. It was closed for safety in mind. Now having some breathing room, I pulled out my phone, but no dial tone. In a development that only served to add fuel to the fire now burning within me. There was only that one piece of evidence, the photograph. Looking at the image over and over, with sweat inching down my brow, the realization set in that I was trapped with this beast imprisoned together in this godforsaken forest night began to fall. Fear settled thickly in my chest like lead, realizing my mediocre numbers for backup was unwise. Camping solo was disadvantageous against the nightmare terrorizing me. Outside dim light, illumined outdoor shadows, voices of fellow humans sounded eerily distant, desperately seeking camaraderie. Relief from abandoned isolation, yet lacking phone reception, diminished hope and survival's outcome. Anguish filled this miserable night. Claw-like fingers grasped at the doorway moments ago. There's no stopping this relentless monster's incessant stalking. Consumed by ravenous appetite, it would rip me limb from limb. The thought alone brought bee to my throat. My heart pounded like a relentless wraith at the gates of perdition. Adrenaline charged through every vein, like a stampede of wild horses straining my ears for any sign of movement, until all at once, the blood-curdling roar booms from the distance. I tried to call for help, but my phone still had no reception, leaving me with no choice but to act. I knew I needed to find some way to protect myself. Before the creature arrived, my hands fumbled around, searching for any makeshift weapon. In a stroke of luck, I found a sharp rock embedded in the soil and grasped onto it, clutching my rock and steadying my breath. I braced for the confrontation coming my way. The silence was deafening at first. Then came the snapping branches and the faint rustling leaves underfoot, which gradually grew louder. As the creature approached, its footsteps slowed, occasionally stopping entirely as though it was listening. A low growl echoed through the dark night, making it impossible to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. The growl intensified with each moment until a horrifying figure stood before me. A creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its body was like a grotesque blend of human and animal attributes. Disgusting gnarled limbs unnaturally elongated, twisted at odd angles with patches of coarse fur. Its face bore an eerie resemblance to a human, but distorted by rage, while an unhinged jaw revealed rows of monstrous teeth hungering for flesh. The beast lunged towards me without warning, fierce eyes burning into mine as if it could peer into my soul. Relying solely on instinct, I used every ounce of strength to swing the rock towards its head. The connection sent a sickening crunch echoing through the air as the creature staggered back. Momentarily stunned, seizing the opportunity presented by this brief reprieve, I darted through the forest seeking refuge as quiet as possible, despite not knowing where safety may lie. My only thought focused on putting as much distance between myself and that horrifying creature. While attempting to navigate through the thick underbrush by merely touch alone, due to darkness hindering visibility, I stumbled upon a group of fellow campers huddling around a fire breathlessly. I begged them for help explaining the nightmare unfolding and the relentless monster pursuing me. Although most were skeptical, one older gentleman stepped forward, his face dawning with recognition. After hearing my frantic description of the creature and location of my terrifying encounter, he revealed the chilling legend behind the beast that hunted me. He spoke of a creature known as the Shadowlander, thought to have roamed these woods for centuries. According to his account, the Shadowlander was once believed to be a guardian spirit, warding off intruders and protecting its territory. Unfortunately, time darkened its purpose, transforming it into a malicious predator preying on anyone who dared enter its domain. And if that was indeed the Shadowlander hunting me that night, I realized how doomed my situation was. Moments passed as arguments erupted between campers, some eager to help, while others insisted upon leaving immediately. The old man urged them all to stay, citing that safety came from numbers, and abandoning me would only guarantee my death. As the debate carried on, time continued to take away towards an inevitable climax. Hearing a familiar growl echo through the forest once more sparked action amongst those present. Together, they fought fiercely against the Shadowlander with everything at their disposal: rocks, sticks, even burning logs from their fire. Their brave efforts drove the beast back into the darkness, not defeated but temporarily deterred, buying us precious moments to plan our escape. Exhausted from the intense battle and aware, we required expert help in ridding ourselves of this monstrous inhabitant lurking within these dark woods. We set out at dawn towards civilization. Equipped with strength in numbers and determination. Anchored by fear, fueling our urgency for survival, we forged an unbreakable bond. United through terror. Together we successfully reached help. Forever changed by our disturbing encounter. Forced to confront our deepest fears in the face of an ancient, once legendary, vengeful creature, we were reminded that some stories remain better left untold. As survivors, we bear the chilling burden of knowing the Shadower still roams those very woods waiting for its next victim. I should have known it would end up like this when I ventured out here. My name's L.A. Castellan and I'm an investigative journalist. It all started when I couldn't overlook these strange cases happening in a remote village in Kentucky. People went missing without a trace, and those who were found were mutilated in unimaginable ways. It sounded like something right out of a horror novel, but the mounting reports made it hard to ignore. The village itself was old and secluded, with dense forests surrounding it. Residents lived somewhat disconnected lives, their homes scattered about the landscape. Some folks had gone so far as to say an obscure cult had been at work, but I couldn't find any evidence to back up those claims. Upon arriving at the village, I was greeted by Rosalind Finch, a local, who agreed to show me around and share some insights with the community. She was a talkative woman with an infectious laugh that brightened even my skeptical disposition. She led me to meet her friend, Flint McDermott, who seemed to like his privacy even more than most of the other villagers. He lived alone in a rundown house near the edge of town, while nervous about discussing anything directly related to the strange happenings. His words were cryptic, leading me closer to understanding the mystery. Around dusk, we stood on the porch of Flint's house discussing his gardening skills. When I heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from the woods near his property, Rosalind seemed distressed when she admitted that these occurrences had become more frequent recently. Suddenly, a growl emerged from the darkness. It sent shivers down our spines as we searched for the source in panic. A large creature appeared before us. Its form entirely unfamiliar and terrifying. Sharp teeth accompanied a grotesque blend of fur and scales running along its spine. "Stay behind me," Flint commanded as he reached for an old shotgun that hung above his door frame. Flint's quick thinking led the creature away from the house and into a nearby barn, allowing Rosalind and me to escape. With heavy hearts, we climbed into her truck and rushed out of the village. Knowing we couldn't just leave Flint to face this nightmare, we returned to town to gather reinforcements. Since people were reluctant to help due to fear, it took some convincing on my part. They feared the creature so much that none of them wanted any direct confrontation. However, I explained the tragic consequences if it was left unchecked. Armed with a MLY crew of villagers and their unreliable weapons, we finally set out towards Flint's house. We knew we had to save him. He risked everything to protect us. Not too long ago, the sound of gunshots punctured my conversation with Flint earlier, but then it went eerily quiet. As our group arrived at the old barn, the air grew tense. The scent of blood amplified everyone's anxiety tenfold. Rosalind hesitated as we stood at the entrance, noticing something smeared on the half-open door. "He wears different faces," she whispered. "What does that, Evan, mean?" I asked concerned Rose, and I exchanged a concerned glance, but there was no time for questions. We had to find Flint as soon as possible. As we gathered our resolve, the group of villagers stepped into the barn with us weapons at the ready. The barn's interior was straight out of a horror scene. Blood was splattered across walls, some of which seemed to form crude words or symbols that I didn't have time to decipher. That IR required from before was suddenly broken by a weak groan in the corner of the room. We rushed over to find Flint, battered but alive. 2 villagers tended to Flint's wounds, while the rest fan out searching for any trace of the creature. We didn't need to look far. Loud crashes echoed from the far end of the village as the monster rampaged through another building, leaving destruction in its wake. As one villager cautiously peered through a window for better visibility of the creature's position, he gasped and recoiled in horror. "Where are its eyes?" he shrieked involuntarily. His reaction forced me to get my first good look at this terrifying beast. It stood on 2 legs, like a man, but with powerful hind quarters covered in tufts of coarse black fur. Its elongated arms ended in large curved claws capable of ripping through flesh with ease. The gas sight was its face or lack thereof. It had no discernible eyes or mouth. Instead, it had various grotesque stitches all over where facial features should have been. This nightmarish being seemed unstoppable as it hurled itself into buildings and effortlessly tore through their foundations. Our feeble attempts at self-defense seemed doomed from the start, yet we couldn't turn our backs on this demon any longer. Suddenly, an elderly woman named Mother Grey stumbled into view from one of those butchered structures. She screamed desperately while being pursued by that faceless monstrosity. In that split second, Rosalind grabbed me by the arm and urged everyone to charge, brandishing their makeshift weapons. Our small battalion collided with the menacing figure, hoping sheer numbers could give us an advantage. The creature roared and swiped at us, violently, sending villagers flying like ragged dolls. The pain we inflicted on it seemed only to fuel its rage. I could hardly bear the gruesome sight of mangled bodies around me as the chaos unfolded. Mother Gray staggered back to her ruined home and started rummaging through debris. Desperation etched on her face as she searched for something crucial. Within moments, she emerged with a tattered old book covered in strange symbols. She called out to us to hold the creature at bay just a little longer. While she consulted this mysterious tome with no other options, we continued our coordinated attack on the beast, hoping her newfound knowledge could grant us victory. Mother Gray's feverish search for answers continued until she found a page that made her eyes widen in shock. She then shouted to us as she pointed at the monster. Its AO local legend tells of this abomination created when innocent souls are tortured beyond reason. There must be a way to stop this. The name Gallo resonated with dread among those still standing, even though none of us fully understood what it meant or where it came from. Having a label for our tormentor offered a glimmer of hope. Mother Gray didn't have time to find a weakness for this mythical beast before it, tired of our interference and abruptly vanished into thin air, likely seeking easier prey elsewhere. Our group was left blooded and broken, but alive for now. With a heavy sigh of relief, we returned to Flint lying on the barn floor. His condition stable but severe. The injured were cared for, while others mourned those we had lost in the struggle. Mother Gray and a group of volunteers set out to research desperately how to defeat the Gallo, though I couldn't believe what I had witnessed nor comprehend the horror I faced. One thing was crystal clear: we had to find and kill this creature before it brought more agony to our village. No one rested easy that night, but at least we could face the new day with unity and purpose, and I hoped together we could find a way to end our living nightmare. I had just finished a grueling shift at the lumber mill and was meeting up with my friend Malachi Orson for a much-needed break deep in the remote wilderness of Sioux County in Northern California. The dense forest provided a sense of isolation from the exhausting world outside. As we set up our campsite near the banks of the Clamo River, I shared a story from my childhood about fishing with my father and how it gave me an everlasting appreciation for nature. That first night we sat by the roaring fire, laughing and exchanging tales about life's oddities. As darkness enveloped us, we heard distant noises from the surrounding woods. Nonetheless, we didn't think anything of it and assumed it was simply wildlife investigating our presence the following morning. Malachi and I found a set of peculiar scratches on nearby trees that weren't there the day before. The scratches were long and deep, with some reaching up to 10 feet high. We hypothesized some large animal was marking its territory but couldn't come up with anything that matched that description in this area. As the sun set on our second day at camp, we heard those strange noises again, only this time, much closer than before. The eerie sounds almost resembled whispers mixed with guttural growls. We tried calling out to any potential hikers but received no response. Our nerves were on edge as the scratching grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like something was moving through the trees just beyond our campsite perimeter. Even though both of us were armed with rifles for protection against spares or other possible threats, we realized that neither of us had cell reception for backup support. If things went south, we decided to move our camp further downstream in case whatever creature was out there felt threatened by our presence. As we broke down our tents in haste, I noted that Malachi inadvertently dropped his wallet near where he had been sitting last night. As I retrieved it, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. What initially looked like a distorted shadow eventually became clearer as a massive creature lumbered into the moonlight. The beast was like nothing either of us had seen before. It stood easily 8 foot tall, covered in matted dark fur, with bone-chilling eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. Its razor-sharp claws looked capable of tearing apart flesh with ease. Recognizing the danger, we were in Malachi and I decided it was best to leave everything behind, except for our rifles, and make a hasty retreat back towards civilization. Panic fueled us as we navigated through the dense forest, guided only by our flashlights. The trees felt oppressive, as if they were closing in around us. With each passing moment, the beast seemed to be stalking us just outside our line of sight, occasionally letting out guttural roars and slamming its massive limbs against tree trunks to keep us off balance. With the terrain becoming more treacherous and our adrenaline nearing exhaustion, Malachi tripped and fell, twisting his ankle. In the process, he let out a sharp cry of pain that echoed through the night air. We both knew that if we stopped for even a moment, we would not survive. As I helped him to his feet, I made an impulsive plea. "Listen, You hide. While I continue down this path, I whispered as softly as possible. I'll keep making noise to draw its attention away from you. Malachi resisted at first, but eventually conceded that it was our best chance for one of us to escape alive and get help. He concealed himself within a dense patch of bushes while I continued running down the rough trail. As every step grew more exhausting than the last, my body began screaming at me to stop. But fear kept me moving forward. Just when I felt I couldn't take another step, the growls behind me began to intensify. The creature was closing in and it knew it had us separated. Now I charged further down the path, my breath heavy, as I stumbled over roots and rocks. Every sound I made echoed in the still air, but it was a necessary risk. I needed to draw the creature away from Malachi so he could remain hidden and survive. After what felt like hours of running, I suddenly hit a dead end. The path terminated at the edge of a steep cliff. In desperation, I searched for another way around or any place to hide, but there was nothing. As fear constricted my chest, I remembered my pocket knife. Although not ideal against such a monstrous beast, it was better than nothing. Before I had the chance to retrieve my knife, the creature revealed itself towering above me with unlike feline features and large curved horns protruding from its head. The beast's sheer size was overwhelming. Covered in tough leather-like skin, with sharp claws extending from its muscular limbs, it seemed unstoppable. "What are you?" I whispered as I faced my seemingly inevitable doom. The creature roared in response but did not attack yet, as if studying me, perhaps considering if I were worth the effort, though entirely unequipped, to fight back. I recalled Malachi hiding in the bushes and clenched my fists with determination. I shouted for help with all my strength and waved my arms wildly, though initially refusing to move from his position. Malachi emerged once he saw that our adversary had cornered me at the edge of that cliff run. I yelled at him with desperation, fearful of his impending demise. However, instead of fleeing blindly through the woods as before, Malachi grabbed a large stick and struck a nearby tree trunk as hard as he could. Upon hearing this abrupt clangor, much like its own intimidating attacks earlier that night, the beast hesitated before launching itself toward its quarry. The quick distraction provided us with an opportunity to escape. We sprinted breathlessly in a blind panic, desperate to find refuge or help. The beast maintained a steady pursuit and seemed less willing to toy with us, now allowing its guttural roars to fade into the background as it tracked its prey with cold precision. By sheer luck, we stumbled upon a small hunting cabin hidden in the thick forest. We could hear barking from within. A sign of life, I frantically pounded on the door. A grizzled man opened, sizing up our disheveled forms with suspicion. We breathlessly explained our predicament and begged for his help. This stranger expressed his weariness but saw the fear in our eyes and the blood staining my injured friend's clothes. He allowed us inside. The man had only been living there temporarily during his hunt for an elusive wild game. As he introduced himself as Dale, we noticed his extensive knowledge of folklore and woodland monsters. Though initially skeptical in believing our story about the creature pursuing us, as Malachi rested nursing his twisted ankle, I provided Dale with every detail I could remember about the creature, from its size to its fearsome features and unexpected dexterity. His eyebrows raised with each fact shared. This sounds like the very creature I've been looking for," he said hesitantly after a moment's pause. "It's called the Cuddle, according to local legends, said to stalk these woods, preying on travelers." Our amazement at learning this information was short-lived, as we knew that help was essential to escape this vow. Being Malachite bandaged his ankle as best he could, wincing in pain but gratefully accepting any assistance Dale offered. Dale armed himself with his hunting gear and agreed to escort us back to town while keeping watch for any signs of the monstrous Cuddle. We hobbled through the woods cautiously until we reached safety. It appeared that the Kleck did not follow us after we had hidden in the hunting cabin. As our newfound friend Dale parted ways, returning to his pursuit of the elusive creature, we thanked him dearly for saving our lives and revealing the villainous Cuddle. From that moment onwards, Malachi and I were forever changed by our encounter in those dreadful woods. Haunted by the nightmare that had stalked us relentlessly, we spoke rarely of that night, but one thing was clear: without Dale's knowledge and willingness to aid two strangers in trouble, we may have been doomed as victims of the Cuddle. I'll never forget the day I set out on a solo hiking journey in the thick woods of Alaska. My name's Town, and I took a break from my high-stress job as a detective to find some peace. A close friend had recommended this particular spot, saying that it was the perfect place for a serene adventure. The forest encompassed me. As I marched along a narrow trail with my trusty walking stick, sunlight filtered through the dense foliage, creating intricate patterns on the ground. I felt relaxed and found myself chuckling at an old joke my coworkers used to make about trees being natural suspects in criminal cases. A couple of hours into my refreshing hike, I discovered a strange scene in a small clearing. It appeared to be a campsite, hastily abandoned and showing signs of struggle. My detective instincts kicked in, urging me to investigate further. Broken chairs and scattered debris hinted at something sinister that had unfolded here. As I wandered deeper into the woods, curiosity gnawing at me like an itch needing a scratch, I came across another hiker who introduced himself as Guthrie McMahon. Guthrie was frantically searching for his brother Beck, who had separated from him during their hike earlier. Despite my skepticism, his genuine worry persuaded me to help him with his search. Continuing through the forest together, we stumbled upon several twisted bodies of deer cunningly hidden behind bushes, maimed and mauled beyond recognition. The gruesome sight unnerved both Guthrie and me. The forces behind this carnage didn't quite look like anything human or animal we'd seen before. As darkness fell upon us, we set up camp reluctantly, fear creeping into our beings while trying to remain composed. Huddling by our campfire, we exchanged stories about our lives and tried to ease the tension with an occasional joke in time. Guthrie shared local legends about an enigmatic creature known to stalk these very woods, a seemingly invulnerable and bloodthirsty entity whose identity remained a mystery. I brushed it off as outlandish folklore, but his conviction in the story left lingering doubts in my mind. As we delved deeper into the woods searching for Beck, my skepticism grew weaker under the weight of bizarre evidence manifesting before us. Following a barely discernible trail marked by torn plants and bent branches, we came upon a cave entrance, a place that radiated malice and dread. Summoning our courage, Guthrie and I cautiously proceeded into the shadowy lair. Narrow beams from our flashlights barely pierced the darkness, revealing obscure patterns smeared on walls with what appeared to be dried blood, an unnerving sight that heightened our growing unease. A twisted labyrinth of tunnels led us further down into the earth. The air suddenly filled with the metallic scent of blood. As we stumbled upon Beck's lifeless body, savagely torn apart in an unholy, ritualistic manner, Guth broke down in tears. While I tried to suppress my own shock, the grim reality striking us with full force. Suddenly an air-spitting and guttural roar echoed through the subterranean caverns, threatening to consume our very sanity. With terror-ridden hearts, Guthrie and I scrambled through the confusing maze of tunnels and hopes of escape. Consumed by fear, poor Guthrie soon stumbled and fell behind. I could not help but continue onward in desperate hope for survival. Faint cries rang out from behind me as Guthrie met his end at the hands or claws of this malevolent creature. My heart threatened to leap out of my chest as I raced through passages filled with an consuming dread. The distant pounding of heavy footsteps pursued my escape as I turned corner after corner hop, slowly draining away. With each agonizing moment, my breath grew, ragged lungs, pleading from the effort of fleeing while knowing death's impending arrival. As I continued running through the labyrinth of tunnels, I noticed murals on the walls that seemed to depict a massive creature with a wolf-like head, huge claws and a massive muscular body. These chilling images stayed in my mind as I continued running from the nightmarish sounds echoing behind me. My legs felt like they would collapse when I finally emerged from the tunnels into what appeared to be an old, forgotten village. The eerie stillness was unnerving. Overgrown vines and collapsed buildings spoke of long ago. Abandonment, desperation fueling my pace. I frantically searched for a way out of this forsaken place. I hid behind one of the decrepit huts as another roar reverberated through the air, sobbing and shaking in fear. I dare not call for help, knowing all too well that the creature would find me before any rescue could arrive. Muffled cries pierced through the fog of terror surrounding me. Crawling cautiously towards the sound, I discovered one of our archaeology crew mates, Lila. She was huddled beneath debris from a fallen structure. Her face streaked with panic-induced tears, without a word. We exchanged understanding glances. Beck and Guthrie were gone. There was no time for shared grief or discussion, as our monstrous pursuer drew nearer with every passing moment. Suddenly LLA pointed towards a fallen statue in the distance. It bore a striking resemblance to the monstrous images within the tunnels. Perhaps understanding this abomination origins would bring us closer to salvation, or at least provide us with information that could safeguard others from our untimely fate. We silently agreed to search for a way to destroy or nullify this relentless threat. Before escaping, our desperate mission took us deeper into the village until we came upon an ancient library, a sanctuary of cobwebbed scrolls and weather-worn stone tablets. As we delved into crumbling texts and painstakingly deciphered the forgotten language, a grim narrative took shape. The village had been terrorized by a merciless creature called Wolvarian, an embodiment of merciless savagery. According to local folklore, it could stalk its prey for miles, its giant claws tearing apart bodies for bloody feasts. The villagers had managed to contain the beast within the depths of those tunnels with stone and spell. In our unwitting excavation, we had unleashed this nightmare upon ourselves and potentially the world beyond. As we digested this chilling revelation, distant crashing sounds signaled that our foe was closing in. We had no choice but to flee deeper into the labyrinth in search of a means to either vanquish or evade this stalking horror. Hours, or perhaps days passed before we stumbled upon an underground chamber adorned with ancient symbols and designs. In its center stood a crystalline cage from which emanated an eerie sense of power. Its sigils seemed to hint at both hope and dread. With grave purpose, LLA and I set to work on activating this relic from ages past. A final desperate gambit as our monstrous pursuer doggedly closed in. As the earth shook beneath the Wolvarian's frenzied aged, arcane patterns began swirling around us, depicting an endless struggle between predator and prey, the eternal battle against terror itself. As the last pattern snapped into place, LLA leapt towards the crystalline cage, anguish etched across her face. I realized too late her selfless intention to lure our tormentor into its ancient prison alongside her, in a self-sacrificial act of desperation. Before I could react, both Lila and the Wulian were enveloped by the luminous structure as it collapsed under their combined weight. An unearthly screech tore through my soul as they disappeared together, vanishing in tandem with my hope for salvation. Swallowed by sorrow, I picked my way back out of that cursed maze, a haunted shell of my former self. No one would believe the horrors we faced in that forsaken cavern, and I dare not share this tale, lest W. Varian's name spoken brings terror anew. So here I stand as a lone sentinel, guarding the world from the unspeakable truth buried within an ancient crypt bound to never reveal the fate of those lost in its depths or the abomination lurking in that crystalline cage. I woke up with a start, cold sweat drenching my clothes. My heart raced in my chest as I glanced around the small cabin I remembered. My name was Leander Sorensen, and I'd been staying here in the Appalachian Mountains for a much-needed break from city life after a divorce and struggling to keep my job as an engineer. This trip seemed like the perfect way to reset and find some peace. As I settled back into my sleeping bag, attempting to shake off the nightmare that had interrupted my sleep, I heard a low growl coming from somewhere outside. At first I told myself it was just the wind through the trees, or perhaps a raccoon rummaging through garbage. Still feeling uneasy, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. As soon as I opened the door, chills ran down my spine. The forest was eerily quiet, no night, bird songs or rustling in the underbrush. Something seemed off. I walked around the cabin trying to clear my head when I stumbled upon unsettling markings on a tree, one set similar to claws and another set of muddy hoofprints leading into the woods. Following this path felt unwise, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. Suddenly my neighbor Hank arrived with his dog, which had wandered away earlier that day, and spotted me by the strange markings. "Hey there, Leander," he called out. Before noticing the tree near me, he looked at me quizzically for a moment before giving an exhale and remembering his dog was safe. "Now you know," he said nonchalantly. "It's funnier than hell if people tell stories about monsters in these parts." His smirk faded as he continued studying those prints. While he patted his dog on its head, absently deciding not to dwell on it further. We strolled back toward our cabins, but that nervous unease never left entirely. Later that evening, as I prepared dinner, The terrifying growls began again. This time they were much louder and I felt my entire body trembling. I got on the radio to contact Hank next door. Surely he would be experiencing this unsettling phenomenon too, Hank? I whispered in a trembling voice. Do you hear that? There was dead silence for a moment before he responded. Yeah, Leander, stay inside and lock your doors. Sounds of rustling came from outside my cabin, followed by a distinct snapping of branches drawing closer. Desperate for answers and terrified, I called out to Hank once more via the radio. What is it? What's happening? Before he could answer me, an ear-splitting roar erupted just meters from where I was standing. The following seconds could only be described as pure paralyzing terror. Glass shattered as something crashed through my window. Part of me wanted to run towards Hank's cabin for safety, but sheer animal instinct rooted me in place. Not daring to make even the smallest sound or movement, the creature revealed itself a monstrous amalgamation of beast and nightmare. Its twisted body lurked between that of a wolf and a wild boar. Its muscular form contorted as if perpetually writhing in agony, it crept forward with malice burning in its eyes. That seemed driven by two things, rage and insatiable hunger. From somewhere deep within me, adrenaline finally kicked into gear. I desperately grabbed anything to defend myself. A knife left out on the table from dinner earlier that night, praying this was enough to keep the abomination at bay. The room felt as if it had been plunged into ice-cold water. As the air seemed to thicken dramatically around us, it appeared as though time itself had slowed down. While both predator and prey stood poised, tentatively calculating their next moves. Inching closer to me, the creature snowed with saliva dripping from its elongated snout and jagged teeth. I tightened my grip on the knife, knowing that any sudden movements could cost me my life. As the strain of the situation built up, I heard Hank's voice come through the radio again. Listen to me carefully, he whispered urgently. That thing is a local legend. They call it the scaling. People say it hunts at night searching for prey in these isolated areas. You need to get out of there as fast as you can, but do it slowly and calmly. Barely able to register his words, I nodded slowly before realizing he couldn't see me. Okay, I murmured into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. I began to cautiously edge towards the door while keeping my gaze locked on the scrael. Every painstaking step seemed to take an eternity as I moved ever so slowly across the room. To my horror, the beast mirrored my steps, gradually advancing towards me with its claws scraping across the floor. As soon as I was close enough to touch the door handle, I flung it open and bolted from the cabin, sprinting through the darkness towards Hank's cabin. The scaling let out an enraged roar that reverberated through the night and pursued me relentlessly. My legs begged for respite with every step, but I knew that slowing down would mean certain death. The beast grew closer and closer until its hot breath seared the back of my neck. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a fallen tree that created a sizable barrier between us. Desperate for any advantage against this relentless hunter, I scrambled over the tree trunk and miraculously managed to put some distance between myself and it as it struggled to navigate over the obstacle. Heart pounding in my chest, I finally arrived at Hank's cabin and, frantically pounded on the door, he pulled it open and ushered me inside, quickly locking it behind me. We could still hear the scaling snarls now just barely muffled by the cabin walls. I've already called for help, said Hank, his eyes darting to the window. They'll be here soon. Just tried to stay quiet and wait it out. We huddled in the darkness as the hours ticked by and the monstrous sounds outside continued every howl, growl and crash, fueling our anxiety until at last we could hear the distant wail of sirens approaching. As the authorities neared the cabin, I could feel a small sense of relief wash over me, knowing not just one but several people would ensure our safety from this fabled monster that had already destroyed so much. The scaling seemed to recognize its imminent danger as well. It let out one final wail before retreating into the darkness just as rescue vehicles arrived on the scene. While recounting our harrowing ordeal to a group of officers and an expert in folklore named Dr. Thompson, they revealed that they had come across similar cases over the years involving strange beasts that were once thought to be mere legends. As our lives slowly returned to normal following our terrifying experience with the scaling, Hank and I remained vigilant in our remote surroundings, knowing full well that not all legends should be dismissed as simple tales meant to frighten late-night campfires. Although we had managed to survive our encounter with a living nightmare, I silently mourned those who hadn't been as fortunate. I knew then that certain creatures of this world were not meant to be understood, but rather respected, for when mythical beasts become tangible predators, any semblance of safety fades away like shadows in the night. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as I drove into the remote town of Joshua Hills. My name is Sullivan Bryce, journalist by trade with a penchant for unraveling mysteries. On this particular assignment, my editor sent me to this small Nevada town to cover a puzzling string of unexplained events. Upon arrival at the local hotel, I struck up a conversation with the man behind the counter. Reggie Peters was his name, and he proceeded to detail some strange incidents that had recently been occurring. Folks disappearing into thin air, livestock mauled without explanation, and eerie sightings on the outskirts of town. My curiosity piqued. I decided to explore these claims further with the help of some locals. That's when I met Jackie Turnbull and her son Kyle. They claimed to have seen it, the elusive creature believed to be at the heart of the problem in Joshua Hills. They described it as a massive, hairless beast with razor-sharp claws and piercing red eyes. A chill ran down my spine as KY recounted an incident. Just last week, he was out by Old Man Whitaker's farm when he heard something stalking him in the brush. Kyle wanted to call for help, but limited self-service and fear gripped him. All he could do was hide. As it passed by, he noticed an odd smell emanating from the creature like burning leaves. Despite my skepticism, I couldn't deny that their story was hauntingly plausible. We agreed to team up and investigate Joshua Hill's mysterious antagonist further. Our search led us to an encounter with another eyewitness named Sarah Donnelly. She swore she had narrowly escaped after being cornered by the creature. As I stood there trembling behind some rocks, Sarah whispered. I aimed my flashlight right at its face. It hissed at me like a snake before darting back into the shadows. The more we learned about this animalistic menace, the more I found myself questioning my belief in the logical and rational. With every interview we seemed to uncover something new, yet no closer to finding any tangible evidence of its existence. The locals had grown increasingly distressed and unwilling to venture out alone. After dark, Joshua Hills was paralyzed in fear, but I couldn't shake off my stubborn skepticism. We spent days scouring the desolate landscape, hoping for clues, yet found nothing conclusive. On our last day of searching, Reggie called me frantically, Sullivan. He panted. You've got to come to the diner, Rita. She's gone missing. I desperately asked if he was certain that the creature was behind it. As a father of two himself, Reggie's voice held concern for his friends' well-being and frustration over this ever-growing mystery. Nothing else could have taken her like this, he explained. As dread settled into my chest as Jackie, Kyle, Sarah, Reggie, and I stood in what remained of the diner's back room, I could hardly comprehend the destruction before us. The room was torn apart as if a tornado had struck it, walls collapsed, tables overturned, an acrid smell of burnt wood and metal filled our nostrils. I tried to stay focused on our task at hand as C quipped cynically about how they'd never find a place that seared double-stacked pancakes, quite like Rita had made them. We each shared our theories about where the frightening beast might be hiding, all distinct, but cementing that it wasn't safe here anymore. Determined not to abandon Rita and deny this creature any more terror. Over Joshua Hills, we trailed its path far into the Nevada wilderness. With every step further from civilization and safety, my heart began pounding harder. I couldn't silence my inner voice telling me we were out of our depth. As darkness fell and shadows stretched across our path like gun fingers, we finally stumbled upon a grisly scene. The fire still smoldered where Rita's limp form lay among a shredded campsite. I suppressed my nausea and emotions. There was no time for that. Now time stood still as the ALC-consuming terror that had been lurking on the fringes of my perception snapped into focus, and I beheld the monstrous creature before us. It towered over our MLY crew, claws extended and eyes burning like red-hot coals. Staying in a tight form, we inched closer to the towering creature. The scales on its back shimmered green and black, its muscular tail thrashing ready to strike. It beat its razor-sharp teeth, each one as long as my forearm, Kyle squeezed the branch he'd picked up earlier. I could tell he was scared, but we couldn't leave Rita's body to this beast. It roared at us, menacingly, festering saliva dripping from its mouth, cooling on the ground and sizzling on the dry earth. My breath quickened. I could feel the urge to run tugging at me, but knew it would mean leaving my friends behind. I shouted above the roar, "Kyle, Bella, we need to distract it." While one of us grabs Rita, they nodded in agreement. Without a plan, we made our move. Bella began pelting it with rocks she collected earlier. While Kyle waved his makeshift weapon and yelled loudly to draw its attention, the creature swiped at him with massive claws, risking everything. I dashed forward and wrenched Rita from its grasp. The pain etched across her face told me it was too late. Reluctantly, dragging her body away from the site of carnage, I heard rustling behind me. Bella and Kyle had managed to disengage and were following me swiftly. "You grabbed Rita," Bella exclaimed breathlessly. As we continued our escape into the darkening night, helplessness washed over me as they questioned what could have possibly led us here and what kind of creature we'd encountered. "We need help," I murmured, realizing the extent of the monster's brutality would require a larger force than just us three, but with no cell reception. Deep in the Nevada wilderness and our nearest neighbor, miles away from town, by the time any assistance arrived, it might be futile pressing onwards. We quietly navigated through the dark trees. All past disagreements forgotten in the face of our shared nightmare. The following evening we reached the outskirts of another town, shivering from cold and exhaustion. Bursting through the door of a diner, we recounted our tale to the stunned locals. "Sounds like a," said one of them, a callous outdoorsman with years of wilderness experience behind him. "It's an ancient creature from around these parts. They say it was once human, that it was cursed long ago, forced to stalk the land as a beast. But how do we stop it?" Kyle's eyes filled with desperation, wondering if there was anything that could help protect Joshua Hills and its inhabitants. The outdoor horseman looked at us solemnly. "The KYG is immune to our weapons, but legend says it's frightened by fire. The last sighting decades ago was driven off by setting the surrounding area." A light hope swelled within me. If this had worked before, maybe it could save us too. We formulated our plan and returned to Joshua Hills with as many willing townsfolk as we could muster. When night fell, the Kiro emerged once more from its lair, brazenly striding through town as if it belonged there. Armed with makeshift flamethrowers and torches, our MLY crew confronted the beast as a united front. Instantly fear rippled across its scaled skin and its fiery eyes widened at the sight of flame roaring in terror. It turned tail and fled into the night until it disappeared entirely. As our community began piecing together shattered lives and rebuilding from the ashes left behind by the Kai's rampage, we honored Reed's memory in a somber ceremony. Those who had stood beside me against this monstrous enemy became lifelong friends. Their valor and courage recounted in Joshua Hills folklore. 4 years to come, though, no one else dared to speak it aloud. Every so often, I found myself wondering if the KYG may be lurking just beyond our borders, waiting for another chance to wreak havoc and grant another victim's final wish. I never thought it would happen to me. I was just an ordinary guy from Oklahoma working a dead-end job in a small-town hardware store. My name is Cyrus Choplin, and little did I know. No, this day would forever change my life. One morning I set off on a hike at Beaver's Bend State Park, a place I was familiar with, having spent countless weekends exploring its various trails. The weather was perfect for it, not too hot, not too cold. Just right as I trekked through the lush green forest, I struck up a conversation with another hiker. Her name was Ramona Driscoll, an old friend from high school that had moved away after we graduated. We hadn't seen each other in years, and it was a great opportunity to catch up. During our hike, we chatted about the good old days, shared some jokes about our mutual friends and went down memory lane. It felt like only minutes had passed when we noticed how late it had already grown. Glancing around us as DUS crept in, we realized that we'd wed far from the main trail. It didn't take long for our laughter to die down. As darkness began to envelop the forest, the distant howl of what sounded like a wounded animal echoed ominously through the otherwise silent woods. Ramona looked worried, but I tried to reassure her that it was probably just a coyote. Nothing we couldn't handle. As the sun sank further below the horizon, we focused on finding our way back by sticking together and using the moonlight to illuminate our surroundings. Soon enough, though, we stumbled upon something that would haunt us for the rest of our days. The remains of a dismembered deer lay scattered across our path, its viscera strewn across the ground like some grotesque painting on Mother Earth's canvas. Ramona gagged at the sight, and I couldn't blame her. It was unlike anything we had ever seen before. We decided to continue our trek back to the trail, carrying a sense of unease that intensified with each step. The distant HS grew louder, and I began to feel as if I could hear them echoing in my very chest. It wasn't long before we heard branches snapping in the distance, followed by an overpowering odor of decay that seemed to assault our senses from every direction. We stared at each other, too frightened to say anything, when we heard the breathing, raspy, ragged breaths drawing closer on all fours. The creature emerged from the shadows, unlike anything either of us had ever seen, a monstrous predator twisted by years of torment and hunger. Its piercing gaze burrowed into mine as its fetid breath washed over my face like a deathly caress. Its enormous size cast an imposing shadow over both Ramona and me. We stood frozen in horror for what felt like an eternity before instinct finally kicked in. Our legs sprang to life in unison, propelling us away from the beast with newfound speed and adrenaline pumping through our veins. The forest became a blur as we ran for our lives, desperately trying to escape this nightmare brought forth from hell itself. We didn't dare call for help, as we knew the monster would hear us. The thick forest seemed to close in on us as we ran the endless and twisted shadows, mocking our fear. Our breaths came in, gasping heaves. I didn't know how much further we could run until exhaustion would get the better of us. Our fears started to escalate when Ramona stumbled over a nail-led route and cried out in pain as she struggled to rise from the ground. I heard the creature's relentless pursuit approaching closer and closer. I grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet, helping her keep up with me. Despite her pain limping, I couldn't help but notice how grotesque this being looked in flashes. Whenever it caught up, it had gaunt skin that hung loosely off its bony canine-like frame. Its eyes were bewilderingly human-like but held an almost sinister intelligence. After nearly an eternity of running, Ramona implored between gasps that we had to find shelter where we could hide until the creature gave up. We spotted a small cave hidden behind some shrubbery nearby and rushed inside, hoping beyond hope that we had found salvation from our seemingly indefatigable pursuer. We remained silent inside that cave. Our panicked breaths, almost thunderous in my ears, minutes turned into what felt like hours. Our bodies tensed with anticipation as we listened intently for any sounds of the creature outside. Any rustle of leaves or snapping branch set my entire body on high alert. It may have been luck or fate, but eventually the snarling and breathing seemed to move away from our hideout. However, without any certainty that the monster had left entirely, we barely dared breathe while cramped within that small space. When our sense of safety slowly returned in increments, I tried to formulate a plan to help Ramona seek medical attention for her now visibly swollen ankle. We needed to make it back to the trail and find another group of hikers who could provide her with assistance. As we gingerly exited the cave, I silently marveled at how relatively unharmed we had been during this frightening encounter, despite our ignorance regarding folklore creatures. But I knew that our lives couldn't continue like this, and an overwhelming sense of responsive possibility to establish some semblance of normalcy for Ramona and myself settled upon my shoulders. We managed to hike through the forest, our path illuminated by my cell phone's flashlight. Our progress was slow, as Ramona's swelling ankle hindered her mobility significantly. We were so focused on putting distance between the creature and ourselves that we barely noticed the dilapidated cabin tucked away in the trees. With caution we approached it and found an elderly man inside. With great trepidation I explained our unnerving encounter with the monster. To my surprise, he acknowledged understanding and began scribbling out a detailed sketch of our fearsome antagonist. He then consulted various ancient-looking books scattered throughout his humble abode before identifying our pursuer, a creature known as a Wendigo in local folklore, a twisted monstrosity created when man engaged in cannibalism during times of desperation as terror washed over us both. At this revelation, the old man shared with us valuable knowledge regarding the Wendigo's weaknesses and limitations, in hopes of helping us evade it once more, though this was far beyond any rational understanding either of us ever possessed. We listened closely and committed his recommendations to memory. Our escape from that forest will always haunt me, but thanks to the information given by that mysterious older man, we managed to avoid a grisly fate at the hands of the Wendigo. When we finally emerged from those woods, bruised, battered and weary, yet alive, we knew we would never forget what occurred in those dark, twisted shadows. It was almost dusk when I decided to take a walk through the woods behind my house. I'm Dear M. Fletcher, an amateur wildlife photographer, and I had recently moved to this remote corner of Wyoming. For as long as I could remember, I had been fascinated by untouched wilderness, and it was about time I explored my new surroundings. A pine cone crunched underfoot, a sound that always put me in a good mood. Walking nonchalantly deeper into the trees, I played back some memories of my college years in my head. The parties, late-night conversations and laughs shared. As the thought lingered, the darkness settled in and a sudden cold breeze sent shivers down my spine. Rubbing my hands together for warmth, I continued through the forest. The path ahead split into two directions. Thick fog hung over one path while the other seemed clear and well-trodden. Without much thought, I chose the clear one and continued on. Not long after turning onto the path, piercing screams cut through the silence. Startled by such an unnatural noise coming from seemingly nowhere, confusion washed over me. There were no neighbors for miles around us who could be suffering out here. Resolved to find out where it was coming from, I followed the noise with hesitant steps. As I got closer to its source, I noticed a giant structure looming in the near distance. It appeared to be an old derelict cabin encased in overgrowth. With every step forward and each involuntary crunch of leaves beneath my feet, my heartbeat quickened. "Is anyone there?" I shouted hesitantly. I heard screaming, "Do you need help?" No response came, just eerie silence enveloping me once more. Gathering courage from deep within myself, I approached the cabin's door without making a sound and gave it a gentle push. It creaked open with a shudder. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. The room was lit dimly by moonlight, revealing the mangled blooded corpse of a fellow hiker. A look of pure terror etched across his lifeless face, suppressing the urge to vomit. I reached for my phone to call the police, but realized I had no reception this far out in the woods. Before I could even consider my options, an inhuman growl emanated from somewhere within the cabin. Emerging from the shadows came a grotesque creature, unlike anything I had ever seen and possibly tall with unnaturally long limbs and sharp talons. Its once human face twisted into an unrecognizable snarl. With an adrenaline-fueled jolt, I bolted back towards my own home without looking back, worried that if I did, I would see this monstrous hybrid hot on my heels. As I ran through the dense trees and began to approach my house, I glanced back to see if it was still pursuing me. In that split second, vines lashed out and entangled my legs. I fell hard into the cold earth and attempted to free myself from their grasp. The horror of what might follow if caught fueled an unmatched urgency to escape. Flinging off the vines and gasping for breath, I continued running, despite the pain, shooting up my legs. As I limped up to my house, I fumbled for my keys and hastily locked the door behind me, unsure of what to do next. I knew I had to think rationally. I needed help, but who would believe the nightmarish ordeal I just witnessed? I remembered my neighbor, Sarah, who was a nurse. She might be able to help me with my injuries without asking too many questions, at least until we could figure out what we were dealing with. Sarah was always friendly and approachable, making her an ideal source of support under these circumstances. Determined and in pain, I dialed Sarah's number, hoping she was still awake at this hour. "Hey, it's me from next door. Sorry for calling so late, but I really need your help right now." Within minutes, Sarah arrived at my doorstep looking concerned. She asked no questions, as she hurriedly tended to my wounds in silence. As she wrapped bandages around my legs and made sure there was no significant damage or bleeding, I couldn't help but consider the risks of involving her in this horrifying situation. Still unsure about the grotesque creature that had relentlessly pursued me through the woods, just minutes earlier, a dread settled in the pit of my stomach. "I know this is going to sound crazy," I began hesitantly, "but there's something in the woods, something horrifying and dangerous." Sarah raised a skeptical eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I can't explain it," I continued. There's nothing logical about it. All I know is that it killed someone, a fellow hiker, mercilessly, and more than that, it's after me too. Her expression shifted as realization washed over her face. A recognition of sincerity in my voice prompted an unexpected response. You know, she said softly, I've heard whispers in town about something like what you're describing, living deep within the woods. They say it hunts at night, stalking its victims like some kind of vicious predator. My heart sank. Her words only fueled my fear. We both knew that this creature was unlike any natural predator. Sarah suggested that we lock all the doors and windows, turn off the lights and stay quiet. She wanted to minimize our chance of being detected by the creature. While we figured out our next move as we sat in hushed darkness, I couldn't help but notice that Sarah was not as frightened as I was. Instead, she seemed determined to uncover information that could help us survive this ordeal. After hours spent frantically researching on her phone and making calls to local officials, she finally discovered something vital to our survival. It's called the human, said Sarah, her voice quivering slightly as she shared her findings. It's an ancient creature from local folklore, believed to live in these woods for centuries, hunting and feeding on unsuspecting victims. Her words sent shivers down my spine as we both came to the realization that this nightmare we were living might not end anytime soon. We need to leave. I whispered, my voice barely audible. We need to get somewhere safe until we can figure out how to deal with this thing once and for all. Sarah nodded in agreement. We hastily grabbed some essentials and raced to her car as the engine roared to life. Our heartbeats quickened, aware that every second could mean life or death. Driving away from everything that felt familiar, we were painfully aware of the darkness that lay beyond the scope of the car's headlights. The road seemed endless and unforgivingly eerie under the moonlit sky, as if fate itself had pushed us into an abyss of uncertainty. Only one thing remained clear. Our lives had been forever changed by the sinister presence of the Lumine, and although it felt impossible at times, I vowed I would never give up on finding a way to confront it. Driven by the determination to overcome my fears and ensure that no one else would fall victim to its monster cruelty, I remember stumbling upon the small, isolated town of Silver Cove during my road trip across the country. As an aspiring writer with an interest in true crime, I had always been drawn to the smaller, lesser-known places that often harbor dark secrets. My name is Jasper Clemens, and I had no idea what was waiting for me in this seemingly innocent town. Upon my arrival, I immediately noticed the friendly nature of the locals, who introduced me to their hidden gem of a diner. As I enjoyed a surprisingly scrumptious burger, I found myself engaged in a conversation about strange occurrences that have been plaguing Silver Cove. According to Thomas Harp and Cynthia Hollis, a series of strange incidents had recently struck panic in the community. Each time someone went missing, their body was discovered, mutilated beyond recognition, or their remains scattered across the surrounding wilderness. I couldn't shake my sense of unease, which only grew when I met Abigail Pritchard. She had been researching these events ever since her cousin, Nelson Pritchard, became one of the victims. Together, we decided to investigate further and arranged to meet at Thomas Harp's cabin, located at the edge of a thick forest that bordered Silver Cove. Underneath a pitch-black sky lit only by the moon, we arrived at Thomas's cabin. Before entering, we gathered flashlights, warm clothing, and our concealed weapons, not knowing what we might face ahead. With each step deeper into the forested darkness, my quickened as adrenaline cowered through me. As we made our way through the trees which loomed menacingly above us. Like silent witnesses to countless horrors that occurred within these woods, we stumbled upon a shallow grave, reeking with decay and reluctantly uncovering what remained of Nelson Pritchard. His skull cracked open, hinting at some unspeakable violence unleashed on him, continuing deeper into the forest. Now driven by personal reasons for Abigail and sheer curiosity for me, we eventually crossed paths with a group of terrified locals led by Cynthia Hollis herself. Together, we recounted our discoveries thus far, and Cynthia spoke of another creature she had caught a glimpse of. Earlier, one she could only describe as a hulking, beast-like figure, moving with animalistic agility. With some encouraging words and a reminder that firearms were at our disposal if needed, we pressed on. In the distance, we could see what appeared to be an old barn, partially consumed by the ever-advancing forest. Entering the barn cautiously, we found more evidence that would shake the core of sense and reason. Pairs of human remains stacked upon one another, creating a horrifying sculpture that clearly incorporated elements of bones and flesh carefully designed by the elusive antagonist itself. As we regrouped after this gruesome discovery and tried to make sense of it all, I mentioned an old legend told to me when I was a child, the Wendigo, a monstrous supernatural creature, said to stalk remote areas preying on humans. Although this suggestion was met with skepticism, the fear in each person's eyes betrayed their belief that this terrifying legend was more than just a story. The sudden gutto growl emanating from behind us shook us from our thoughts, and we fell into an instinctive defensive stance. The sound alerted us to what seemed like an enormous mass, advancing quickly towards us from out of the darkness. At once ragged breathing tumbled through space, interspersed with swift yet vicious sounds. As something vicious was forging its way to us, closing in as everyone braced themselves, the sight of this terrifying being appeared before us, bizarrely twisted limbs supporting its enormous hunched frame, with elongated claws dragging heavily across the ground, leaving behind deep gouges in its wake. Cynthia screamed "shoot," but her voice cracked and only served to ratchet up the tension. As I, along with the others, raised our firearms, our hands shaking from the mix of terror and adrenaline that gripped us all, the creature lunged at us with monstrous force and brutality, the air of its breath, suffocating our senses and clouding our thoughts. I fired my gun towards it, but my unstable hands didn't offer much accuracy. Others joined in, but the flurry of bullets seemed to only provoke it further. "Run, everyone run!" I screamed as the beast continued its onslaught. We scattered in various directions, leaving behind the horrifying sight of our injury-hued and fallen comrades. I sprinted without knowing where my legs would take me, panic overriding any semblance of reason. My breath grew heavy as desperation consumed every fiber of my being. The creature appeared undeterred by our attempts at defense or escape. It pursued us with relentless vigor, its claws shredding through the earth in a symphony of destruction. Our screams echoed throughout the darkness, reverberating like haunting reminders of this nightmarish ordeal. I stumbled upon a small cabin ahead, and with no other option in sight, I rushed inside and bolted the door shut as best as I could. A hodgepodge of dusty old books filled the shelves within the cluttered space, likely an abandoned hunter's haven. Footsteps approached from outside, as some others managed to find refuge in the cabin as well. The grounded tremors and distant roars indicated that the creature hadn't deviated from our pursuit. We knew we couldn't stay here for long. "Quick check if there's anything useful around here," Peter blurted out frantically. We rummaged through stacks of hunting equipment and papers. When Cynthia discovered a dusty old book falling apart near one corner, "I think this could help," she stammered, hesitantly flipped through yellowed pages that depicted strange creatures, artwork similar to what we encountered earlier. "These illustrations, they remind me, dash." The tension was palpable, leaving us with no time for contemplation without warning. A fierce growl punctured the air, paralyzing all of us for a brief second. We braced ourselves as the door began to buckle under the creature's blows. "Listen, you need to call emergency services right now," I told Cynthia, thrusting my cell phone into her shaky hands. "The reception is poor, but it might just work." As we steeled ourselves for the impending onslaught, Peter grabbed a nearby shotgun and started loading shells into its chamber. The rest of us, armed with whatever makeshift weapons we could find, prepared for the worst. As the orchestra aided, violence outside intensified. Our apprehension threatened to swallow us whole, but then something unexpected happened. The creature's anger seemed to double and its rampage ebbed away. As suddenly as it arrived, I got through. "They're sending help," Cynthia exclaimed in relief and disbelief. The realization that we might survive dawned on all of us. We cautiously stepped out of our temporary refuge, horrified by the sights that laid before us. The carnage strewn across our once peaceful campsite would live on as an unforgiving memory. The shock had nearly numbed us from remembering the one hope we had left, Cynthia's book. As emergency services arrived on site and evacuated those wounded in the ordeal, they soon surrounded an expert who had come along, a folklorist who specialized in creatures of myth and lore. We showed her the book Cynthia found, and she proceeded to study it thoroughly. "It appears you may have encountered a Wendigo," she explained somberly after much examination. While it was difficult for us to accept such a supernatural happening, every other explanation fell short in explaining what we had experienced that terrifying night. As we mourned our fallen friends and departed from that dreadful place, I couldn't shake off the lingering thoughts about the beast. How could such an encounter have occurred? The folklorist words reverberated in my ears, giving life to the chilling question that haunted each one of us. Are there more creatures like the Wendigo lurking in the shadows waiting to strike? Only time would tell. My phone buzzed loudly in my pocket. The voice on the other line was frantic and unfamiliar. She introduced herself as my younger brother, Matt's co-worker, Bridget Morgan. Breathing heavily, she explained that she and Matt had driven out to Cheyenne Mountain State Park after work, a spontaneous plan to enjoy nature after being cooped up in their stuffy office all day. Bridget's words poured out rapidly, her fear palpable. They had become separated during their hike and something terrible had happened to Matt. I asked why she didn't call 911 and she replied that she tried, but there was no signal and it was growing darker. Panic shot through me as I grabbed my keys and agreed to meet her at the trailhead. I sped towards the park, a sudden storm darkening the skies above. Upon arriving at Cheyenne Mountain State Park, I found Bridget pacing nervously. I introduced myself as Jack Robertson, Matt's brother. She led me down the trail, recounting with shivers how they had come across a tortoise with its insides pulled out. It was like some animal had attacked it, but left no trace of what kind. We observed our surroundings cautiously. While walking deeper into the dense foliage, we reached a small clearing where Bridget stumbled onto another corpse. This time it was a deer mutilated, just like the tortoise. My heart raced as this gory scene met my eyes. I knelt to examine this strange phenomenon closer. That's when we heard a rustle in the bushes. We stood up slowly in unison, struck by the same sudden feeling of being watched from afar. Bravery turned into terror as a monstrous creature emerged from the shadows. Its body coated in matted fur, large, powerful limbs supporting it as its head swiveled towards us on an elongated neck. The piercing red eyes locked onto ours. Every fluid move it made exuded power and sent chills down my spine. Bridget let out a pained whisper. That's what took Matt before I could react. The creature lunged forward in a flash, its speed catching us. By surprise, it swung a massive clawed hand at Bridget, her scream echoing through the woods. As she collapsed, I grabbed her arm tightly, dragging her away from the creature and into denser foliage to hide. As we ducked under bushes and ferns, Bridget cried out weakly through grimaces of pain, heaving, with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I tried to process what was happening. We needed help urgently. If it was clear, this creature wouldn't stop until it found us again. It seemed like hours had passed as we stumbled around in circles, desperate to escape the dark woods. That's when Bridget spoke up. The color drained from her face as she told me about an old newspaper article she'd read once about a mining incident that occurred in this area over a century ago. A group of miners became trapped and resorted to unimaginable things for survival before they were even discovered. There were rumors that some spirit or creature emerged from that tragedy, claiming its victims generation after generation. Listening to Bridget's story felt like ice water running through my veins. Our mouths went dry as we heard what sounded like heavy footsteps in the distance. In an instant it was upon us again, its dark figure crashing through the trees with a guttural snarl. My mind raced. I had left my gun at home. We scrambled up. Degrees of hopelessness etched in our faces. My heart pounded in my ears while hot breath bore down on me from behind. That same energy carried me forward on battered legs. Bridget clutched her bleeding side with a wince as we stumbled along together towards an abrupt cliff I had no recollection of encountering. While entering this forsaken park, we reached the edge of the cliff feeling cornered and vulnerable. My mind went blank as to how we could escape with nowhere left to run. I grabbed Bridget's arm and we ran along the cliff's narrow path, hoping there would be a way back into the woods. The creature pursued us relentlessly, its heavy footfalls echoing through the night. Suddenly in front of us emerged a small cabin hidden away on a ledge lower down the cliff. Face desperate for cover, we jumped down to the platform and stumbled inside. The cabin appeared abandoned, with a thick layer of dust covering every surface. I shut the door behind us and scanned the room for anything that could serve as a weapon. To my surprise, there was a dusty library within the cabin that seemed to contain hundreds of old books. Why this isolated cabin had such a collection would remain unanswered. As we had no time to ponder, we tried to catch our breaths while listening for any signs of the creature's approach. Suddenly an idea popped into my head. I picked up one of the books and began skimming through it, scanning for any illustrations or passages about creatures from legends or historical testimonies. Bridget guarded the door with her blooded hands, holding a large metal bar we had found in one corner of the room. After several intense minutes of flipping through countless pages, I stumbled upon an illustration under the heading La Mange Cadavre. The gruesome drawing closely resembled what we had witnessed, a tall, beastly figure with elongated limbs and broad shoulders that seemed near human, but not quite. The text claimed that this creature was a product of human sacrifice during times of extreme hardships, such as those miners trapped underground during their last days becoming a twisted embodiment of their suffering and despair. An insatiable hunger for human flesh drove it ever since. With time running out and our efforts to call for help halted due to no cell reception, we decided to gather any local materials that could serve as traps or obstacles. We would face the creature on our own, as it seemed. It would not stop hunting us until one of us were dead or both incapacitated. We set traps outside the cabin and watched anxiously as the night enveloped the area. Suddenly, a twisted reflection of its disfigured face showed in the dusty window pane, followed by a guttural snarl as the creature attempted to invade our makeshift holdout. As it lunged forward one of the traps and snared its massive leg in a net-like contraption we had constructed with old cables found in a nearby shed, giving us both peace of mind. Though temporary, the distraction allowed Bridget and me time to escape back into the woods down another hillside path. Through sheer luck, we managed to evade our pursuer for hours before finally reaching safety, a highway on the outskirts of the forest. We flagged down a passing motorist and immediately requested transportation to the nearest police station, desperate to relay what had happened. Upon reporting our encounter with LCH Cadavre to authorities, we were met with incredulity and skepticism. However, they took it with some grain of seriousness. Due to our physical state and Bridget's injuries, an investigation was launched into locating the remains of victims claimed by this seemingly mythical creature throughout many generations at twilight. As I sit on my front porch in pain over Bridget's healing wounds and reflecting upon those victims lost in its reign of terror, I mortally hope that no further generations suffer at the hands of La Mange Cadavre. Our encounter exposed its lair, providing us an opportunity to research and prevent its resurrection or resurface as a force for destruction. Ever again, I was driving along the winding road that led to my cabin in the dense forests of Northern California when a deer suddenly leaped in front of my car. Luckily, I managed to swerve in time to avoid hitting it. My pulse quickened as I continued along the remote path towards my weekend getaway, a small cabin I had inherited from my grandfather. This trip was meant to be a much-needed break from my stressful job in Silicon Valley, a time for solitude, and reflection. My name is Ralph Stinton, by the way, and you might say I have been having quite a rough stretch lately. I had almost reached the cabin when I spotted an old pickup truck with its hood propped open by the side of the road. A man dressed in dirt-stained overalls stood next to it, his hands smeared with grease. He didn't seem threatening at all, so I pulled over and asked if he needed help. "Nope, everything is under control," he replied curtly. "Just watch out for bears around here, buddy, seeing them get closer to people's cabins." "Thanks for the tip," I said before driving off again. My first night at the cabin was peaceful. I felt grateful for this solitary respite from my chaotic life in the city. Like every first-time visitor to this remote area, though, I couldn't help feeling slightly uneasy about wildlife poking around at night. Following my new neighbor's advice, I took extra care, locking all doors and windows before going to bed. It was around midnight when a loud thud outside woke me up abruptly. Curious but cautious, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously unlocked and opened the door, shivering slightly in the cold night air as anxiety coursed through me. In front of me were scattered pieces of gar that seemed like they had been dragged from one of the cans nearby. Was it simply a bear? After all, something told me it wasn't, and that something was the deep measured breathing I heard just beyond the beam of my flashlight. As I slowly turned towards the sound, my heart skipped a beat. Standing there on the edge of the tree, Lane was a large creature, unlike anything I have ever seen before, either a bear nor any familiar animal. Its body was covered in coarser and its eyes glinted like silver coins. I stood there petrified and watched as it suddenly sprinted towards me too fast for me to even close the door. Instinctively, I switched the flashlight off and slipped into a corner of the cabin, silently praying that it wouldn't find me. The creature burst through my door and wrecked my once cozy retreat, sniffing and runting as it searched for prey. I stayed perfectly still behind an EP turntable while trying my best to silence my ragged breaths. In those agonizing moments stretched by terror, I felt fate's grip tightening around me. How could anyone ever be prepared for an encounter with this unknown monstrosity? Were I to survive this harrowing experience? Who would even believe me? After all that could tie reality to this moment would be the evidence of destruction left behind by this mysterious beast. Just when hope seemed to wither away in irretrievable darkness, I heard a sound that gave me renewed strength, the truck engine revving in the distance. The creature must have heard it too, because it suddenly froze in its tracks and tensed up before making a swift retreat into the shadows of night, trying to keep its enormous figure in sight. Even though my legs felt like jello and my chest tightened with dread, I risked tipping off our unexpected savior that it was worth following through on its hasty visit. Reaching for my phone with trembling hands, while retaining a visual connection with both the creature and the approaching truck, I muttered a desperate plea for help to the only person within miles to provide it. "Hey, it's Ralph from earlier. Something attacked my cabin man. I don't know what the hell it is, but you have to come down here. It's still around." I whispered into the phone, gasping for breath. I peeked around a tree to make sure the creature was far enough away before continuing towards the truck's location. My legs ADHD from my frantic sprint, but I had no time to rest. I could hear the loud growling noises getting closer again, signaling that the beast had resumed its pursuit. As I reached the truck, I noticed its owner, Tom, stepping out of it with a confused expression. Before I could speak up, however, the creature burst through the trees and lunged at us. Tom managed to dive back into his truck just in time to avoid the deadly claws swiping at him. "What in God's name is that thing?" he yelled out as he slammed his door shut. "I don't know, just drive," I shouted back while climbing in myself. Tom slammed on the gas pedal and we sped off down the nearest dirt road. Fortunately, the monster wasn't able to keep up with the truck and eventually disappeared from sight, catching our breaths and trying to wrap our heads around what we just seen. We drove until we found a small clearing which seemed like a good place to stop and discuss our next move. Taking out his phone, Tom began researching potential information about this monstrosity. He quickly found an article that described a mythical creature from local folklore named Daru. This creature was said to resemble an oversized wolf-otter hybrid with long, sharp claws capable of tearing through flesh easily. That's got to be it. This thing matches all those descriptions. But what are we going to do now? I asked, nervously, as Tom continued reading about this. Haru. It says here that this creature usually resides near bodies of water and hunts down anyone who crosses its path. Tom informed me. His face grimaced as he continued reading about their attacks becoming increasingly brutal over time and leaving a gruesome trail of gore in their wake. "We need to contact the authorities, but we should be careful not to draw this thing back to town," I suggested, nodding in agreement. Tom continued scrolling through articles seeking any information about how to fend off the Dobart shoe or prevent it from striking again. Neither of us could find a solution, but we knew we had to warn others about this deadly predator for now. We drove back to town and reported our harrowing encounter to the local sheriff. Many people were initially skeptical of our story of a mythological monster hunting us down in the woods. However, the massive destruction left behind at my cabin and our terrified expressions gradually convinced them that something abnormal was happening in the area. Despite a full-scale search operation, the Daru evaded capture. The chilling attack served as a grim reminder that folklore and reality sometimes intertwine, shattering our preconceived notions of what's possible. In memory of those whose lives were tragically cut short by this monstrous creature, a memorial was erected in town. I often visited that memorial and promised myself never to forget the horrifying night when an old myth came alive right before my eyes. I stepped out of my truck and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh pine as I entered the Jackson River Wilderness in Virginia. My name is Marcus Kinsley, and I was not an avid hiker, nor did I have extensive experience in wilderness survival. However, I felt drawn to the challenges that nature offers. Little did I know that the challenges I would face on this trip far exceeded anything I had predicted during the first few hours. My excitement grew as I found a sense of solace in the solitary woods. The sun slowly vanished behind thick clouds, casting eerie shadows along my path. Unfazed, I continued deeper into the dense forest until I stumbled upon a small clearing. There I met another hiker, Clara Wyo, who had stopped to rest her tired feet before carrying on her journey. After a brief pause, we decided to hike together for safety and companionship as we pushed forward through rough terrain and increasingly ominous weather. Clara shared some hilarious tales from her college days, stories that provided much-needed comic relief. As evening approached, we found ourselves near an abandoned cabin surrounded by large gnarled trees. It was then that we heard a blood-curdling scream from within that uninhabited structure. We rushed forward with concern for whoever might be in trouble, but froze at the entrance-way at what we saw next. Inside the dilapidated cabin lay a mutilated body with deep gashes covering every inch of skin exposed to our view. The barbaric scene forced us to reckon with our deepest fears, as we knew that whatever caused such horror was certainly still lurking nearby. Clara reached for her phone to alert authorities, but there was no self-service in this remote area. Bravely gathering our resolve as we could not simply abandon this gruesome sight, Clara searched for any alternative ways to contact help, while I kept watch outside. Upon realizing her own helplessness, Clara suggested that one of us should venture back out alone to find cell reception and call for assistance. We both knew there was danger in splitting up, but in the absence of any better alternatives, we made the tough decision. As Clara went her way, I vowed to protect the map scene so as not to risk contaminating any evidence. The forest canopy transformed into a thick blanket of darkness above me, and every snap in the bushes sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. It was massive and covered in matted black, for much like some grotesque hybrid of bear and wolf, but with elongated limbs and fearsome fangs that exuded an aura of pure primal dread. I struggled to keep my emotions contained as I locked my gaze with this terrifying creature inching backward cautiously. I recalled every possible self-defense tactic I knew from my limited time practicing martial arts. Sweat dripped down my face as the creature shifted its attention towards me. Even gunfire had certainly crossed my mind, but regrettably I was only armed with a kitchen knife, as we hadn't anticipated this level of danger. As fear gripped my chest tighter than any vice, the low growl resonating from the beast sent another rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. In this moment, time appeared to slow substantially. Each breath felt deeper and more laborious than ever before, for with no option left, I yelled for Clara, my voice echoing through the pitch-black woods. She didn't respond, but the beast's attention briefly wavered. A bleak realization dawned on me. Clara and I were too far apart for her to hear my screams over the eerie whispers of the wind. Slowly and quietly I reached inside my pocket and pulled out my mobile phone. Its poor signal SDR limited my options, but I did manage to send Clara a brief message. The creature charged towards me and I avoided its massive paw by mere inches as it swiped at me violently. In a desperate attempt to elude the beast, I sprinted further into the forest with no sense of direction. My lungs bellowed for air, my heart punishing me with every step from all sides. Malicious trees seemed to reach out for me. I couldn't sustain this pace any longer. The predator relentlessly pursued me when, unexpectedly, a park ranger appeared from behind a tree trunk. Armed with a rifle, he fired warning shots into the air to drive the creature away. My legs finally gave way beneath me as I tried to make sense of the situation. Sheriff Thompson and his team soon arrived at the scene, following repeated calls from us regarding disturbances in our area. As they examined our initial encounter site near the mab scene we had stumbled across earlier, one deputy noticed something unusual, an ancient symbol carved on a tree stump by generations that had passed. Intrigued by its history, potentially holding answers about our attacker's identity, I showed this symbol to a historian who eventually traced it back to an age-old European folktale about an infant resilient creature known as Stork, one that had brought unrelenting chaos and misery throughout Eastern Europe during darker times. With all this newfound knowledge came goosebumps. Even now recalling it all send shivers down my spine. The creature's name, combined with the display of savagery we had experienced, struck fear deep within our hearts. I discussed this with Clara, who had received my message just in time to retreat to safety. While Sheriff Thompson had assured us he would patrol the woods until the creature was found, Clara and I made the reluctant decision to leave town. We couldn't bear the constant, hair-raising presence of Stork looming over us. The townsfolk lost faith in ever conquering that malicious force and silently acknowledged that their lives would forever be irrevocably changed by it. As Clara and I drove away from that forsaken place, leaving behind the whispered echoes of forgotten tales seeping through the cracks of time as reminders of our darkest hours, we glanced in our rearview mirrors. One last time, tears blurred our vision as we grieved not only for those who succumbed to Stack's feral cruelty, but also for ourselves, eternally burdened by this unspoken nightmare. Leaving everything behind was painful. However, holding on to a shred of sanity was far more critical for us. As we carried on with our new lives, memories lured like shadows in every waking moment. However, we remained forever grateful for the timely intervention of Sheriff Thompson's team and the park ranger, who ultimately saved our lives. Years passed after that harrowing encounter, but Clara and I could never forget what happened that dark night in the woods. From time to time, revisiting the quiet whispers of folklore would haunt us once more, a reminder of how an ancient tale plagued us with lingering fears, but also united all those touched by it. Despite it all, life moved forward day by day and eventually peace prevailed where nightmare once ruled. Finally free from Stack's reign of terror over us and comforted knowing there were devoted people like Sheriff Thompson out there, protecting towns, folk, from the ever-looming evil, we continued to live our days, one step at a time, confronting the monstrous shadows of our past. Resilient as ever. I leaned against the counter, sipping the lukewarm coffee and listening to the gas station attendant regale me with local gossip. My name's Carter Fleming, and I had found myself in this tiny town due to some unfortunate car trouble. The boredom was palpable, but little did I know that my life was about to take an unexpected detour. The attendant, Hank Ribston, chattered on as his voice echoed through the near-empty station. Yeah, real, crazy stuff going on out there, especially in that old abandoned house just outside of town, he mentioned offhandedly. I raised my eyebrow curiously. What's so strange about it? I asked him. The subject was far more interesting than learning about how Betsy's dog got out again. He leaned in closer before answering, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial level. Well, people have been disappearing around here for years, he said gravely, and every time someone disappeared there's usually a sighting of some creature. I couldn't help but grin at the sudden shift in tone. Hank was apparently a sucker for local legends. Nevertheless, curiosity piqued my interest. Further, tell me more about this creature. I pressed on. He nervously glanced around before continuing as if mere mention of the monster would summon it forth. It's a tall beast with long limbs, he elaborated slowly. Its body is covered in coarse hair or fur and its eyes they gleam like hellfire. Against my better judgment, I decided to humor him. After all, it was better than pondering my car issues and how much money they were going to cost me. So where is this abandoned house? I asked nonchalantly. Hank seemed hesitant at first, but gave me its location about half an hour away from our current spot. With nothing else to do and an unexpected thrill for adventure, I chose to venture out. A little sightseeing couldn't hurt. Right as I approached the dilapidated house, the sun began to dip towards the horizon. The house itself was barely standing, its timbers rotten and windows long shattered. Ivy had found its home on every conceivable surface. Darkness was beginning to encompass the woods surrounding me, when a loud crash came from within, followed by a guttural growl. My heart skipped a beat as my skepticism raced into overdrive. Hello, I called up, tentatively thinking maybe someone had taken refuge there and possibly been injured. The silence that followed was deafening, but something urged me to investigate further. Slowly making my way inside through what remained of a door, the stench of dank rot overwhelmed me. My footsteps echoed in the eerie silence until they were interrupted by a low growl reverberating through the air. Panic began to settle in. This wasn't some scared animal or mischievous local playing pranks. The voice held malice I couldn't possibly imagine. I fumbled for my phone, deciding it would be best to call for help, but realized the battery had died. Hours ago, initial panic escalated into raw terror. As rationality fell by the wayside, I stumbled around in darkness, desperately looking for anything with which to defend myself or try to escape this nightmare. Each footstep carried me deeper into the decaying house, further from any hope of rescue or safety. Suddenly a dim light flickered ahead. A stuttering candle CLE flame left unattended. The room it illuminated seemed untouched by time, much unlike the decaying building around it. The bizarre sanctuary sent a chill down my spine, yet nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me next. A drawer lay open on an old dresser, and next to it a handgun and an unfamiliar device emitting an unnerving humming noise. My heart raced as I reached for the weapon. In a futile hope of evening, the odds against whatever lurked in these shadows. Another growl echoed through the empty house, and this time it was accompanied by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the splintered wooden floor. The chill in my spine spread down through my limbs, rendering me frozen in fear. Yet I managed to clutch the gun tightly. The dragging sound grew louder and my hands trembled as I gripped the handgun. A guttural growl vibrated the decaying walls, signaling that whatever was making these sounds had entered the room. I held my breath waiting for it to appear. A figure started to emerge from the darkness, its movements slow and menacing. The low light provided by the candle barely revealed any detail of its physical appearance. It had elongated limbs covered in dark matted fur, with razor-sharp talons at the end of each digit. Its face was a grotesque mix of animal and human features, with a large snout and rows of sharp teeth. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing came to mind. My knowledge of folklore was limited, as it had never been an area of interest for me. However, this creature seemed to be something out of a scary story, something too horrifying to be real. I knew calling for help was useless. With my dead phone and no phones in sight, my only chance would be to communicate with whatever. This thing was in front of me. Trembling, I managed to utter a few words. What are you?" I stammered, trying to maintain eye contact with the beast. It paused for a moment and looked straight into my eyes before responding with a blood-curdling roar that shook the entire room. I knew there was no negotiating with this creature. It would kill me if, given the chance. The fear surging through me loosened my grasp on the handgun and it slipped from my hand onto the floor. In desperation, I reached for the strange humming device next to the handgun on the dresser, hoping it might be some sort of defense mechanism. As soon as my fingers touched its surface, the device emitted a high-pitched whine that pierced the air and apparently sent waves of pain through the creature. It howled and began to back away. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed the handgun and bolted from the room. I could hear the creature's angry snarls and frustrated attempts to regain composure. As the device continued to emit its piercing noise, I sprinted through the darkened house and back into the open air, never looking back. Days later, after recovering from my ordeal, I mustered up the courage to research information on the creature that had terrorized me. It turned out that the beast was a skinwalker, a creature from the Native American Navajo folklore. The skinwalker was believed to be capable of turning into any animal they wished, making them nearly impossible to kill or identify. I'm still not sure who left that humming device and handgun in that mysterious room, or why they did it. Had they known about the skinwalker and prepared a weapon capable of harming it? Or was it simply dumb luck that allowed me to survive my encounter? Nonetheless, my brush with death has forever shaken my perceptions of reality. I used to trust logic and reason above all else, but after encountering a monster straight out of folklore, some part of me will never be able to shake off that night. As for what happened afterward, I made it a point to get a new phone with better battery life. Immediately, the strange humming device sits on my bookshelf as a painful reminder of that horrifying experience. No one around me knows what happened during those days in the house, nor will they ever know. Some mysteries are better left unsolved due to my close encounter with the supernatural world that many would dismiss as mere tales and coincidences. I'm no longer a skeptic, but now someone who's aware there's more out there than meets our limited human perception. As for remembering those who've fallen victim to unknown creatures and horrors just like this one, I empathize with their families and loved ones left behind carrying on brave faces despite the eerie undertones of mysteries and questions left unanswered. And still, life must go on despite all these revelations. We must pick up the pieces and move forward with our lives, remembering that there is more to the world than we can ever truly understand. I was out hiking near a remote cabin, escaping the usual hustle and bustle of city life. My name is Tobias Mallister, and I've always sought refuge in the great outdoors. Growing up on a farm, I used to bond with my father and learn the value of hard work. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Suddenly I slipped and stumbled upon a grotesque sight. There lay a half-eaten deer, carcass, flesh, torn entrails sprawled all over, but not an ordinary predator's doing. A strange eerie sensation crept down my spine as I tried brushing it off as a mundane incident. I continued my hike deeper into the forest, feeling every stride more burdensome than the previous one, hesitant to call for help. After all, who would believe me or reach me in time? I treed on alone. Later that day I bumped into Melinda Delaney, a fellow hiker I met during my previous outdoor adventures, laughing about getting lost. Yet again, we decided to stick together, finding solace and shared humor and a familiar face. Our conversation was suddenly interrupted by a guttural howl from afar. Startled, we kept moving quickly, but cautiously. This was no ordinary animal. The forest morphed into an unfamiliar landscape as our knees grew within us. Unbeknownst to us at that time, we were now in series of terrors. We reluctantly made camp for the night while pondering our situation throughout our attempt at feigned sleep. We were gripped by unknown fears lurking in the darkness. At daybreak we discovered another gruesome scene, similar to what I had encountered earlier. Melinda recoiled in horror at the sight, calling it unnatural and unlike anything she had ever seen. The map findings spurred us into action. We had to leave this area at once, but found ourselves unable to pinpoint our camp's location on the map. Amid our growing panic, we ran into Arthur Brewster, another lost camper, sharing the same fate as us. He expressed his disbelief at having wandered so far off the intended hiking trail and agreed to join us in our desperate escape. Unable to call for help due to poor reception, a heavy silence blanketed us all as we navigated through the sprawling woods. Alongside our growing sense of doom, hours later, a rustle from nearby bushes made us stop in our tracks. That was when we saw it. An enormous creature with bulging muscles and ghastly features emerged into view. This monstrous entity sent shivers down our spines. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly malice, as if it was stalking for prey. Arthur's weapons seemed pointless in comparison, unleashing an earth-shattering roar. The beast lunged at us just as swiftly. Arthur raised his firearm and shot at it. Several times we watched in astounding horror as the villainous monster remained unfazed by its injuries or pain. Instead, infuriated further, in an attempt to escape, the enraged creature, Melinda, Arthur, and I sprinted through the forest. Its roars echoed around us, amplifying our fears. We tried to call for help, but our phones showed no reception, leaving us with no choice but to run. Arthur fired his weapon, again reminding us of the creature's earlier indifference towards the bullets. We continued our frantic dash through the woods, feeling utterly helpless against this monstrous entity. As we ran, I noticed a familiar landmark, a large boulder covered in moss that I remembered seeing near our campsite. I quickly guided Melinda and Arthur in its direction, hoping that we could find our way back to camp. Once there, we tore through our supplies, searching for anything that could help us fend off the beast. However, all we found were some ropes and a flare gun. As the creature continued to follow us, its guttural growls grew louder and more menacing. Feeling cornered and out of options, Melinda suggested setting a trap for the creature, with teamwork and urgency fueling us. We hastily assembled a snare using the rope and nearby trees. As Arthur loaded the flare gun with trembling hands, Melinda and I hid on either side of the trap. The anticipation was unbearable as we waited for what felt like hours in silence. Finally, snapping branches announced the monster's approach. The slightest glint of moonlight revealed its grotesque muscles, rippling with each step. Its eyes stared intently ahead, as if fixated on hunting us down. Heart pounding in my chest, I held my breath as it lumbered closer to the trap. Just as it stepped into position, Arthur fired at it with a flare gun. The beast bellowed in rage and confusion as Melinda yanked on the rope which hoisted at Medea by its ankle. As it hung there before us, completely immobilized, we studied the creature more closely. It was then that a horrifying realization struck me. This creature wasn't any paranormal being, but rather a twisted version of a man. Arthur remarked on its distorted features. This must be the work of some sick individual with deep knowledge of human anatomy. I've heard legends of strange creatures in these woods, but never thought I'd actually encounter one. Without wasting any more time, we left the creature to its fate and hurried back to our campsite, where we managed to reconnect phone service. Arthur promptly called 911, reporting the crisis and our location. Soon after, local police officers arrived and secured the deformed monstrosity. While they attended to the situation, Arthur quizzed one of them about the creature's origin. The officer revealed that locals suspected it to be a nightmarish experiment from a scientist who once lived nearby, someone obsessed with folklore who tried to replicate mythical beasts. The scientist had since disappeared, but his demented creations evidently remained in the woods. Relieved in knowing that the terror was finally over, we sought solace amongst each other as we mourned for those who had fallen victim to this horrible being. As little as I knew about Melinda and Arthur before they had become my lifeline during our harrowing experience together, now turning out thoughts towards leaving this dark forest behind us forever. We thanked the policemen for their help and made our way solemnly back to civilization. The disturbing events that transpired will haunt us forever, but serves as a visceral reminder that the darkness which lurks beyond human understanding can be far more terrifying than any ghost or goblin. Faced with horrors ripped from folklore brought horrifyingly into reality, we found it within ourselves to stand together and survive. My heart was pounding as I hiked through the thick forest of the Appalachian Mountains, the crisp air adding to the exhilaration. My name is Aine McClure and I'm an avid hiker. I couldn't resist the urge to explore some lesser-known trails. This weekend, though, my wife worried about the remote area I was going to. I shrugged it off. What could go wrong? Our marriage seemed strengthened by our differences. She enjoys art, exhibits, and lectures, while I thrive in the great outdoors. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped and began to form on the leaf-strewn ground. Far away from any cell phone reception and other forms of civilization, a sense of vulnerability began to crawl up my spine. A twig snapped in the distance behind me. I froze. Hello. I called out, but no reply came. My heart raced faster as paranoia took over. Gathering my courage, I continued deeper into the thickening darkness. An hour went by without incident when suddenly a bone-chilling scream echoed through the unforgiving trees surrounding me. My eyes widened in shock as adrenaline coursed through my veins. It sounded like a woman's voice. Someone was in deep trouble out there. I thought of calling for help but remembered there was no chance of a signal reaching anyone in this lonely place, and even if it did, one would help arrive. I clenched my fists and quickened my pace toward the source of the terrifying sound, with fading light making it increasingly difficult to navigate. I tripped on a stray root, protruding from the ground, lifting myself up with a grunt. Blood painted my jeans where my knee had made contact with a jagged rock. Pain shot through my leg but didn't deter me from finding whoever needed help. The pursuit continued for another 20 minutes until suddenly there was movement at the edge of my peripheral vision. I squinted, trying to make out what was lurking just beyond sight. The forest had fallen eerily silent. As I cautiously inched closer, my eyes grew wide with disbelief. At the sight before me, an enormous creature, at least 8 foot tall, stood with its back turned toward me. Its coarse black fur clung to the muscular form, its arms seemingly staged for battle. It crouched over the motionless body of a woman dressed in tattered hiking gear. I broke out into a cold sweat, realizing I needed some kind of weapon. Glancing around, I spotted a large rock and clumsily lifted it. My sweat-slick hands slipping over its surface, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. I needed to act fast, as if sensing my thoughts. The beastly creature slowly turned its head toward me and growled low in its throat, exposing rows of razor-like teeth that reek of bloodlust. Cold terror locked my legs into place. Despite overwhelming fear gripping me, I managed to summon the courage to confront the monster head-on, demanding it steps away from the poor woman. "What do you want?" I shouted at it, praying for the forest to muffle my knees knocking together. The creature didn't respond, but continued to stare me down with its haunting yellow eyes. A mad realization dawned on me. These woods had a protector unknown to most, an apex predator that would kill any who entered its territory. No one ever thought about such a thing in this day and age. And now here we both were predator and prey. The creature suddenly leaped high into the air, those powerful limbs driving it towards me faster than I could react. The rock fell from my grasp as we both collided and tumbled onto the hard ground. An indomitable game of cat and mouse had begun within these remote woods, an unspoken challenge fraught with death, where one mistake could mean my demise. I scrambled to escape the creature's grasp as it swiped at me with sharp talons, its breath hot on my face though the chase continued for what seemed like hours. I never relented. I couldn't afford to. I managed to dodge the creature's attacks, barely escaping its claws as I continued to run for my life. Desperate and without a better option available, I finally decided to call for help. "Help! Can anyone hear me, please?" I yelled in between panicked breaths as I ran through the dense forest. It felt like my voice was swallowed up by the leaves and branches, giving me no assurance that anyone could even hear my cries for assistance. The creature seemed unnaturally relentless, never allowing me a break or respite. My energy reserves were dwindling, and I knew there was only so much more I could take before my body would give in. As fate would have it, help would arrive in a new unexpected form. A park ranger appeared through the trees just ahead of me. "Run. There's a dangerous animal chasing me." I screamed at him as we locked eyes for the briefest of moments. The ranger hesitated, but seeing the panic in my gaze and barely hearing the wild growl growing louder behind me, he began running alongside me. "We need to reach the ranger station. It's not too far from here," he shouted over the sounds of our frantic footsteps. I nodded and put all my effort into keeping up with him without falling behind or losing momentum. The creature refused to halt its pursuit, always a step or two behind us. Its yellow eyes glimmered in between boughs and branches while its claws scraped the ground with unsettling intensity. We finally reached the ranger station. However, our relief was short-lived as we realized that we needed more than a simple wooden barrier to keep the monster out. The park ranger worked quickly and efficiently to lock every door and gather all possible weapons we could use for self-defense. "What is that thing?" he whispered. As we crouched near one of the windows, observing its attempts to circle around our newfound shelter, I shook my head, still breathless. "I don't know, but it's killed a woman and it's relentless." Not more than an hour had passed before we heard noises overhead. The creature had found a way to climb the side of the ranger station and was now perching on the roof above us. We waited in sheer terror, praying for something, anything to save us from the grisly fate we knew awaited us if it managed to break through our defenses. By some miracle, dawn arrived, as our prayers seemed to be answered, as the sunlight began filtering through the trees outside. The creature screeched in apparent agony and instantly retreated from its attack. "The sunlight, it doesn't seem to like the sunlight," I mumbled. "Maybe that's why it attacked during the night. It's weaker during daylight." Once we were sure that we were safe enough to leave the station, the park ranger guided me out of the forest as we made our way to safety. He shared with me that he was familiar with local legends about creatures that lurked in these woods, but never actually belly them until today. Upon reaching civilization, we provided detailed descriptions of the creature to local authorities and cryptozoologists, attempting to identify its species. Eventually, one of them managed to match our descriptions with those of an ancient creature known as Axe. This beast of folktales was described as a nocturnal predator with avian and mammalian features. Though authorities searched the wooded area for weeks after our encounter, no trace of the Strix was ever found, and every day seemed like a surreal dream. The woman who lost her life became another unfortunate victim of circumstances beyond our control. Life moved on for me as I tried my best to forget about the horror I had experienced within that forest. But even now, knowing that such creatures exist at all has made my entire world more uncertain. I think about the creatures that could be lurking out there, those which we have yet to discover, the ones that hide within the shadows of forests beneath layers of disbelief and skepticism. It is both humbling and terrifying to know that we coexist with such dangerous entities whose true nature and intentions are hidden from us. In a world with so many unanswered questions, one thing remains certain. As much as we would like to live in a world where creatures like the Strix and its ilk exists only within the realms of myth and legend, sometimes reality proves to be much stranger and more frightening than any story could ever hope to convey. From the moment I heard about the mysterious occurrences in this small town, I knew it had a story to tell. My name is Arthur Landis and, as a dedicated writer searching for inspiration, I decided to visit Connecticut's remote countryside. Upon reaching what looked like an abandoned gas station miles away from the main road, I cracked open my window and took in one of the most remarkable landscapes I had ever seen. Lush green fields spread out before me, blanketed by a thin fog that concealed the hilly terrain. This idyllic scene was like a painting, missing one element: life. Peering closer through my car windows, I caught a glimpse of movement, only to realize that it belonged to an animal that was silently grazing near the tree line. The sight caled me at the local inn where I checked in. I made light conversation with the innkeeper and patron, who introduced himself as Eugene Whitfield. They exchanged some quiet quips, but their laughter seemed EIE and cloying. Eugene mentioned an old farmhouse not far from the end, where he could supply me with housewarming gifts. After grabbing my essentials for the night from my car, I entered my rented room, onlooking that same green space, still hiding under swirls of fog. The wind whistled through cracks in its timber frame, creating ominous sounds which danced around the settling darkness. The next morning I set off to find Eugene's farmhouse. While crossing those same fields moments ago, enveloped in fog, I found my gaze drawn toward a hulking creature whose odd shape along its back sent shivers down mine, fighting off sudden unease. I chalked it up to early morning disorientation. Upon reaching Eugene's doorstep, he warmly welcomed me into his home, filled with odd trinkets and what looked like old animal bones strewn about. He showed me around and handed over a woven basket of freshly picked fruits. His broad smile tinged with nervous energy. While walking back through those same fields toward the end, I noticed something strange about the hoof prints left on the ground by whatever animal I saw earlier. They seemed unnaturally elongated, almost fused together, as if each leg left not a single indent but many. As the sun set that evening, while I enjoyed my strange gift, Eugene and a few of his friends stooped near the inn's front porch sipping from bottles. They spoke little but watched with quiet curiosity as the dark figure crept closer to them. As it approached, my chest tightened with an unexplainable apprehension as it became more defined. The figure lurched forward dangerously close to our small gathering, casting its long shadow against the dimly lit building behind. On instinct, it made me feel alarmed. Yet unable to look away, the creature had no fur or skin to cover, its skeletal structure resembling something unnaturally. Its scaly snout expanded with every breath and its narrow eyes seemed to burn with an inner flame. Unable to contain myself any longer, I blurted out to Eugene, asking if he knew anything about this creature that now appeared to be stalking us right outside the inn. Eugene hesitated before telling me they'd heard rumors from nearby towns of livestock and missing people who ventured into these woods never returning. He added that nobody dared saying anything because fear gripped them firmly in place. Fear of whatever gruesome reality befell those who ventured too far into the foggy brush. The following day was tense. After my conversation with Eugene, everyone seemed twitchier than usual as night fell again, and I walked through those same disappearing fields along my way back home, fumbling my keys nervously in hand when the chilling realization hit me suddenly. This creature must have been responsible for all those animals missing in the field that night. Gripping onto the housewarming basket tightly by my side, I looked around only to discover that beast staring straight back at me from the edge of my peripheral vision. In a matter of seconds, panic flooded my body. I stumbled over my feet as I frantically tried retracing my steps, tripping on something cold and rigid lodged in the long grass. It was a severed arm with what appeared as ragged bite marks all down. What remained desperate for solutions? I considered calling emergency services, but knew that, even if they believed me, no one could reach me. Before this unspeaking terror closed the distance, I couldn't just stand there. Paralyzed with fear, I had to act quickly, even though I was unsure of where to go and what to do. My instincts told me to avoid the creature's path and run. So I did. I sprinted as fast as my legs could carry me, hoping the creature wouldn't follow. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig echoed loudly in my ears, creating an unbearable sense of dread. Desperately looking for shelter or a place to hide, I spotted an old, abandoned shed on the edge of the woods, with no other option in sight. I dashed towards it. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and pushed whatever objects I could find against it, hoping it would be enough to keep the creature out. There was no phone signal inside the shed, so calling for help was impossible. The only thing I could do was wait and pray that the creature wouldn't discover my hiding spot. As I sat in the darkness trying to calm my racing heart, I heard footsteps approaching outside. They were heavy and seemed to be dragging something along with them. Unsure if it was a person needing help or the menacing creature itself, I decided it was too risky to investigate. Hours passed, the noises outside ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that sent shivers down my spine. Still unable to call for help or muster up enough courage to exit the shed and return home, I remained hidden until daybreak. The light finally filtered through the cracks in the walls of the shed. It was morning at last. Gathering all my wits, I pushed aside the barricade on the door and cautiously stepped out into daylight. It took a moment before I realized there was something lying on top of a nearby tree stump, an old book. Intrigued, despite my ordeal from the night before, I hesitantly approached the book and picked it up. Flipping through the pages revealed it was an old folklore collection containing legends and stories from various cultures. My eyes fell on a particular illustration that seemed to depict the very creature I had encountered. The caption beneath the illustration labeled it as a walker, a massive wolf-like beast with elongated limbs and razor-sharp teeth, known for stalking its prey. It was said to be responsible for countless deaths and disappearances in forests across many regions. As I read further, a shiver ran down my spine. The walker's attack patterns eerily matched the events that had been terrorizing our town. Suddenly everything made sense: the missing livestock, the severed arm I had found, and the creature lurking just out of sight. The folklore book had provided me with both an answer and a new sense of dread. Despite the danger I knew, I couldn't keep this information to myself. With renewed determination and fear pulsating through my veins, I carefully made my way back to town, clutching the book tightly to my chest. Upon arriving at Eugene's inn, I showed him the beast's description in the book. His face paled as he realized this nightmare had a name. Together, we alerted authorities about our findings, fearing that more people would suffer if they were ignorant of what haunted their very own town in time. Due to my discovery of the walker's nature and providing knowledge on how to fend it off or potentially drive it away, our town became better equipped to handle any future encounters with this terrifying creature. With increased vigilance and occasional sightings reported by townsfolk, we somehow managed to maintain an uneasy coexistence, with fear always lurking not too far behind. However, we never forgot those who had fallen victims to the acre. Their memory remained forever etched into our minds as chilling reminders of what lurked in the woods just beyond our sanctuary, waiting, watching, and stalking its prey. I was walking along the tree-lined road towards a secluded cabin in the dense woods of Minnesota when my phone buzzed. The message was from my friend Arthur Thomason. "Hey, it's Art, just arrived at the cabin. It's so peaceful out here." He knew I needed an escape from the stress of my job as a crime scene investigator. Upon arrival, Carrie OIC, a tall and fit woman in her mid-30s, greeted me warmly. We both had been friends with Art since high school, and with our busy lives we rarely got to see each other anymore. Carrie had prepared some spaghetti as we caught up on old times. Suddenly we heard rustling outside. We all peeked through the window and saw a coyote leaping out of the bushes. It was in our nature to be curious and investigate any peculiarities that occurred around us. Art grabbed a flashlight and led us cautiously into the woods, his footsteps firm on the ground, making sure not to disturb any other creatures that might be lurking in pitch darkness. But nothing prepared us for what we discovered. Next to mutilated deer carcass suspended halfway up a tree, its entire body savagely mangled. The gruesome sight sent chills down our spines as we wondered what could have done this. As we surveyed the area for any clues about the predator responsible for this horrific display, Carrie spotted deep scratch marks on nearby trees, marks made by no ordinary animal. Realizing we were potentially dealing with something dangerous beyond our comprehension, Art suggested we head back to the cabin and call for help. However, no sooner had he finished speaking, when all our phones simultaneously lost signal. Desperate for assistance, yet cut off from civilization in these remote woods, left us with no choice but to hunker down together for safety. Then night our conversations revolved around personal matters, while trying to keep our minds off the terror lurking outside. I mentioned how my father used to be a park ranger and somehow I developed an affinity for the outdoors. Despite working in crime scene investigations, we decided to venture out the following day in hopes of finding a higher vantage point to call for help. With each step, our anxiety grew as we noticed more and more alarming evidence. Claw marks scratching deep into trees and massive footprints littered the forest floor. As we continued exploring, we stumbled upon a cave with a pungent, deathly smell emanating from within. Frozen in fear, we couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside the cave was watching us. Just as we were about to turn back, Art spotted something through the darkness of the cave, a pair of menacing eyes glimmering yellow. They betrayed pure malevolence. Crouched behind rocks and hidden by dusk-stem light, crept an enormous creature. Its matted fur hid its rippling muscles as saliva dripped from its jagged rows of teeth. Suddenly, the terrifying beast lunged towards us. Its blood-curdling snarl filled our ears as it charged. Without a second's hesitation, Carrie grabbed a rock and hurled it at the creature's face. The impact didn't stop it, but gave us valuable time to escape its wrath. As we sprinted through the forest, hearing its growls close behind, we scoured our surroundings for any signs of civilization. Our hearts stumped furiously in our chests while adrenaline coursed through our veins. Amidst this life-or-death chase, I reached down deep within myself and found a wellspring of courage. Born from years of working alongside law enforcement, dodging tree trunks and leaping over roots, I reached down and grabbed a fallen branch from the forest floor. Desperate for anything that could provide some protection against the relentless monster pursuing us, we could sense desperation creeping into its frenzy, making the creature even more dangerous and unpredictable. Carrie, always quick-witted, yelled at us to follow her lead as she darted towards a nearby creek, frantically searching for a way of escape. Car's quick thinking led us to the creek as we stumbled into the shallow water, hoping it would slow down the creature. I brandished the branch I had picked up. Not sure how much good it would do Carrie any ideas on what to do next. I yelled as we splashed our way downstream. No clue, but we have to find people. Maybe they'll know how to deal with this thing, she replied, scanning the area for any signs of life. The creature let out a guttural roar and continued its pursuit. Seemingly unaffected by the water, we moved faster, considering our only option was finding people who might be able to help. There was no time to call for police. We knew fully well that it wouldn't even cross their minds that such an otherworldly being threatened our lives. After what felt like an eternity, we spotted a small group of houses up ahead and sprinted towards them. The front door of the nearest home burst open and an elderly man came running out. "What's going on?" he shouted, alarmed by our sudden appearance. "Please help us. There's a horrendous creature chasing us," Carrie cried between gasps of air without. Without hesitation, he ushered us inside his home and slammed the door shut. Finally safe for now, we collapsed onto the floor trying to catch our breath. The old man grabbed a shotgun from above his fireplace and peered through a window cautiously. "What does this thing look like?" he asked. "It's enormous and covered in matted fur, with gnarled teeth and yellow eyes," I reported urgently. His eyes widened in recognition. "Oh no, it's a scar, what Carrie asked frantically. "It's an old tale among folks around here about a monstrous beast that roams these forests," he explained grimly. We might be in more trouble than I thought. Just then the creature slammed itself against the house, causing the entire structure to shake. The old man fired his shotgun through the window, piercing one of its legs. "Run upstairs and find my grandsons. They know how to deal with this too," he instructed us, carrying our battered bodies. We climbed the stairs and found two young men prepared for battle with an array of weapons. We quickly briefed them on the situation before they went to work, barricading windows and doors downstairs. The old man managed to shoot one more round at the scar, Jack. The creature screamed in pain but refused to back down. The grandsons rushed downstairs and began hurling homemade firebombs at it from a side window. As flames licked at the monstrous beast fur, it howled and retreated into the forest. We watched as it disappeared from sight, unsure if it was gone for good. Despite the devastating encounter they'd all had with the monster, no one had been killed. As we recovered from our harrowing ordeal, we learned about this mythical creature, once purely terrifying story that turned out to be all too real. The family who saved us revealed they'd been preparing for years in case they'd come across one, and that time had finally arrived. Sworn to secrecy regarding our experience in order not to incite panic among other residents, we thank them profusely for their assistance and depart. Life may never go back to normal. After that night, however, Carrie and I knew if we ever encountered creatures of folklore again, we could rely on these brave and knowledgeable allies to help us survive in a world far more strange and perilous than we'd ever acknowledged before. I've always considered myself a curious person, so when I heard about the unusual happenings in the small town of Hawthorne, Nevada, I couldn't resist but to investigate. My name is Travis Ellington, and as an amateur journalist, tales of unsolved mysteries and unexplained sightings piqued my interest. Arriving in Hawthorne, I found the town's people initially hesitant to share their experiences, but after a few days of getting to know them, they started opening up. Several days back, folks had spotted something lurking around the outskirts of town. It didn't have a name, they'd simply call it the creature. They hesitated to give any detail about its physical appearance. During my interviews with folks around town, one name frequently popped up: Edgar Jones. People said he had experienced a terrifying encounter with the creature himself. Wanting to hear firsthand what happened, I located Edgar and asked if he'd be willing to speak with me about his encounter. Edgar agreed reluctantly, but thought it would be useless to share his story, since no one believed him anyway. He recalled that he'd gone hiking near Monroe's cabin, an abandoned hunting lodge near the edge of an old mining site known as the Nevada Triangle. He had stumbled upon something unimaginable. While searching for his lost dog, I listened as Edgar described the traumatizing event like it all just happened yesterday. When he found his dog near the cabin, he immediately noticed that something was off. His dog seemed terrified and growled at something nearby. As Edgar scanned the area for danger, he noticed mangled remains of a deer carcass, flesh torn apart and splattered around like a map portrait. Per Betsy didn't stand a chance. Edgar somberly told me, as he described finding his dog more. Just moments later the attack was savage and left little evidence behind other than deep gouges, pouring blood, and the petrified look on Edgar's face. Having heard what I needed to from Edgar, I decided to venture off near Monroe's cabin myself. It was a curious place for such an encounter, surrounded by vast woodland areas and hidden mines. Locals usually steered clear of it due to fear and superstition. Edgar had shown me the way, despite his visible reluctance. Arriving at the remote lodge, I felt a strange sense of unease by its eerie silence. Cautiously I entered the cabin and found remnants of what looked like a campsite: abandoned backpacks, clothes, and even passports scattered over the floor. What could have driven people to leave their belongings behind? Like this panic fear, it made no sense. Searching deeper into the wooded area surrounding the cabin, I noticed something unusual: deep scratches on nearby trees and eerie animal tracks that couldn't be easily identified. The unnerving scene evoked vivid images of Edgar's horrifying encounter with an unknown beast. I called out, trying to see if anyone else was nearby, but there was no response. It seemed as though everyone had fled or worse met the same fate as Betsy and the deer. The need to find help grew stronger, but I knew it would be futile to leave without understanding what this unknown predator was and how it could be stopped. Near the abandoned campsite I found a journal that had been left behind. Perhaps it held answers or at least a clue about what was happening. Flipping through the warm pages, I discovered entries detailing local folklore about a terrifying creature known to stalk these woods, something called the sniggaster. The Sazter was described as having sharp talons for limbs and an elongated, beak-like mouth filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Additionally, there were reports of it having massive wings like a bird of prey. My heart raced as I hypothesized that this creature could very well be responsible for all this carnage. I realized that venturing further into this unknown nightmare alone would only lead to my death, and the despair in finding help weighed on me heavily. So I gathered the scattered passports and decided return them to their owners by reporting to authorities what little I knew. Whatever had happened out here needed proper investigation. As I made my way back towards civilization, things took a sudden turn for the worst. Guttural growls echoed in the distance, and the strange, seemingly preternatural tracks seemed to multiply around me. Torn between locating help and facing whatever monstrous entity lurked at every turn, I chose survival above all else. Following a narrow path leading out of the woods, I found myself staring at a decrepit library. An unexpected sight within these isolated woods. Despite my instinct screaming not to enter, curiosity drove me inside, hoping for clearer answers on what truly hunted these lands. Inside, amidst dust-coated shelves brimming with decaying books, I located a volume dedicated solely to the Sazter legend. It seemed as though fate had led me here. As I read through the pages, a horrifying account of its existence unfolded before me. It detailed more victims, their fates matching that of Betsy and the deer I had seen. It also mentioned a method to repel the creature using specific symbols and scents armed with newfound knowledge. There was only one thing left for me to do: report my findings to authorities capable of handling such an extraordinary case without falling victim themselves. Care Yull. Retracing my steps, I eventually emerged from the woods and hastily made my way into town. I presented my findings, along with the abandoned items and passport information, to local law enforcement officers, who initially met me with incredulity. However, the panic on my face and evidence of what had transpired eventually convinced them to take me seriously. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation into the matter, but ultimately found no trace of the insidious Sazter, nor any concrete evidence beyond what I had first discovered. Although apprehension still thrived within the community regarding this predator's alleged existence, life slowly returned to normally. Yet every now and then, when wandering near those ominous woods or Monroe's cabin, whispers would once again arise about a vengeful spirit or an escaped genetic experiment haunting the area, while others simply held on to the Mab folklore of the Sazter indefinitely. Perhaps some mysteries are better left unsolved as chilling reminders of what lies just beyond our realm of understanding, lurking in the shadows, waiting for unwary prey. Lives were undoubtedly lost in those woods plagued by that nightmarish creature so embedded within folklore, be it man or monster. Some questions may never be answered, but I can only hope that people will learn from these horrors so we may keep our loved ones close and remain ever vigilant for the unknown dangers that lie just out of reach.